Hey guys, Chaos Shinobi here. This is a story where Naruto has a dojutsu that is not the Sharingan, Rinnegan, or Byakugan. This ocular power was lost in time and Naruto is the first to have it in many years. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. Iruka was currently sitting at his desk taking a break from grading his students' papers. His classroom was currently empty because of the fact that it was currently lunch/recess period. Unlike other teachers who like to hang out in the lounge during this time of day, Iruka liked to catch up on grading his students' homework after he ate his lunch. The scarred Chunin's thoughts wandered onto one particular student, Naruto Uzumaki. Out of all of the students in his class, Iruka felt the most drawn to the resident prankster of the class. Iruka supposed that he was drawn to Naruto because both of them were orphans and, unlike Sasuke Uchiha, had to deal with being a social outcast. However, in Iruka's mind, Naruto's lot was worse than his own had been growing up. Unlike Iruka, Naruto had to deal with the stigma of being a demon container. Although the attacks against his person had stopped some years ago, Naruto still had to deal with being shunned by practically the entire village. Iruka didn't want to imagine trying to grow up as alone as Naruto was. Naruto's situation altogether was a fate that Iruka wouldn't wish on his worst enemy, and defiantly not a kid like Naruto. Propping his head up with his hand, Iruka sighed and thought about Naruto's academic situation. Naruto had to be the worst student that Iruka had ever tried to teach. The boy was constantly scraping by in the more intellectual parts of the academy's curriculum. As for his applied ninja skills, Naruto was only average at best at taijutsu, slightly below average at ninjutsu, and pathetic at jinjutsu. To make the whole matter worse, in Iruka's opinion, Naruto was loud and liked to spend a good deal of his time pulling pranks. While some of Naruto's pranking skills could be translated into good trap-making skills, it wasn't helping Naruto in the areas that he needed it. Sitting back in his chair, Iruka thought about what he could do to help out his, although he wouldn't admit it, favorite student. Naruto didn't have the benefit of a ninja clan to help oversee his training or to go give him a slight edge over the non-ninja clan students. Unlike some students, like Sakura Hirano, who didn't have an active ninja currently in the family, Naruto wasn't good at book learning. Actually, Naruto at times didn't seem to be good at sitting down for long periods of time. Iruka's eyes suddenly lit up as that last thought of his caused a flash of inspiration to occur. A small smile started to form on Iruka's face as he thought over his sudden plan. The idea was genius in its own right and Iruka was surprised that no one had tried it with Naruto before. Sadly, Iruka realized that the reason no one had tried it was because most people didn't care enough to help Naruto out. With the small amount of people that cared about Naruto, the chances of someone else thinking of this plan was quite small. Iruka also realized that Naruto would have to be approached in a certain manner in order for this plan to work. However, Iruka was sure he could help Naruto pull the boys' grades up and maybe even cut down on the number of pranks that were pulled in class. Class was over for the day and Iruka's students were happily walking out the door. Just as Naruto was walking past Iruka's desk, Iruka calmly spoke, "Naruto." Much to Iruka's relief, Naruto stopped walking out the door and turned to face the scarred Chunin. With a friendly smile on his face, Iruka continued speaking, "You're not in trouble, but I would like to talk to you. Will you please go sit down in the front row? I'll get to what I want to say once everyone leaves." Due to a few of his classmates snickering at him, Naruto's cheeks became a little rosy. However, Naruto respected Iruka and quietly got out of the line of academy students leaving the room. Besides, Naruto hoped Iruka may just be going to take him out for ramen. Sitting down in one of the seats that Iruka told him to sit down in, Naruto impatiently waited for his classmates to leave the room. Iruka closed the door behind Choji as the big-boned boy left the classroom and turned to face Naruto. Looking up at his favorite teacher, Naruto called out, "Why did you have me stay behind? Is it because they've recognized my awesome skills and are going to promote me?" Iruka had to bite back a slight chuckle as he slowly shook his head. "No, Naruto, you aren't going to be promoted to genin, although I am sure that you will be one soon enough next year when your class graduates." Naruto had a slight pout on his face when he heard Iruka's news but soon brightened back up. Walking over to Naruto, Iruka put his hands on the desk in front of Naruto and looked Naruto straight in the eye. Once he was sure that he had Naruto's full attention, Iruka continued to talk. "Naruto, I've been going over the work that you've done so far this year in class and I have mixed feelings about what I see." Naruto's attention was even more focused on Iruka than Head had been. With a slight bit of apprehension in his eyes, Naruto waited for Iruka to continue. With a gentle and brotherly smile on his face, Iruka continued, "Naruto, you have the potential to be a great ninja, but you aren't working on realizing that potential. Irika hastily continued talking to prevent Naruto from protesting this last fact. You see, Naruto, you have 3 problems that you need to overcome if you want to start reaching your true potential. I've spent some time thinking about how you can overcome these problems, and I've come to a solution. Although he annoyed that he was being told he had faults, Naruto was listening to Irika so that he could hear how to correct the mistakes. Getting off the desk, Irika continued to talk in a friendly manner. Your first problem, Naruto, is that you have trouble controlling your enthusiasm and emotions. Enthusiasm and emotions are very good and an important part of what makes us both human. However, both of these things cause trouble for ninjas if they're not kept in check. I'm not saying that you have to be cold like Sasuke is, but you need to learn some control. Your second problem is that you don't pay attention to things like you're supposed to. I know at times that what I teach is boring, but if you don't pay attention in class, how are you supposed to pay attention on a mission? During a mission, a single moment of inattention could spell disaster. Finally, Naruto, you have a great deal less control over your chakra compared to other students your age. Irika stopped at this point in his speech to make sure that Naruto was paying attention to him. While he was currently frowning, Naruto was paying attention to Irika. Happy that Naruto was paying attention, Irika continued once again. As I've said earlier, I've come up with a way to help you on all of these accounts. I wouldn't have brought these things to your attention if I didn't want to help you improve. For the first 2 problems I've told you about, I recommend that you take up meditation in order to correct. For the first few days or weeks, this idea may seem boring and a waste of time to you, but I know that in the long run it will help you. As for your chakra control problem, I'm going to teach you some chakra control exercises. We normally don't teach these exercises at the academy because almost none of the students produce enough chakra to merit teaching these exercises. So Naruto, will you work with me to correct these problems you have? Naruto's mind was furiously working on what Irika was telling him. A large part of Naruto was upset to hear that he had so many problems impeding his way to become Hokage. However, Naruto was grateful that Irika cared enough about him to tell him about those problems. The fact that Irika was willing to work with him to help him correct those problems made Naruto happy. With a smile on his face, Naruto cheerfully replied, "Don't worry, Irika. I'll do what you tell me to and become a great ninja." 8 months after Irika took Naruto under his wing for personal tutoring, the 2 of them could be found over at Irika's house. Both teacher and student were sitting on Irika's family room floor back to back in the lotus meditative position. It had taken a few weeks, but Irika was able to get Naruto to take up meditation and stick with it. At first, the scarred Chunin had to resort to bribery in the form of teaching Naruto various and even the occasional D-rank jutsu. However, Naruto had eventually come to see the benefits that meditation had brought the young whiskered boy. No longer was Naruto the loud and brash young boy he was earlier in the year. While still very happy and joyful, Naruto now had an air of true confidence about him. He also no longer strove for everyone's recognition but only the approval of those people that truly mattered to him. Personally, Irika was very proud at Naruto's accomplishments. The boy had, through his own hard work, managed to pull himself up from the dead last position to slightly above average in the class. No longer seeing cool and powerful jutsus as necessary to being a great ninja, Naruto had made great strides in mastering the jutsus that Irika had taught him. During several of the in-class sparring sessions that took place throughout the year, Naruto repeatedly made it into the top 5 of the class. There were several very sore egos from some of the clan heirs when the dead last managed to defeat their attempts at a clan jutsu with only a basic and useless jutsu. The most memorable occasion of this in Irika's mind was when Naruto was fighting against Kiba. Naruto escaped a particularly nasty attack of Kiba's by using the replacement technique with Sasuke. Sadly for Naruto and Kiba, neither of them could escape Sasuke's enraged fangirls. One thing, though, that had both fascinated and frustrated Irika was the amount of chakra that Naruto had at his disposal. Even with hours of practice after school doing the water walking exercise, Naruto barely able to create 1 clone. This wouldn't be too bad if it wasn't for the fact that part of the requirements to become a genin was to be able to produce 2 clones. Not wanting Naruto to be held back due to circumstances beyond his control, Irika went and had a private meeting with Sarutobi. The worried Chunin had carefully explained the situation to the aging Hokage and had listed the various lengths that he had gone to in order to help Naruto control his chakra. Sarutobi told Irika not to worry about Naruto's little problem and that he would help find a way around that little problem. During the 8 months of private tutoring, Irika and Naruto grew even closer together. There might not have been any indication of it in the classroom, but Irika and Naruto had started to view each other like brothers. A part of this could be seen in that Naruto continued to want to meditate with Irika and just hang out with him. These private meditation times together were something that Irika always looked forward to and was more than happy to continue to do with Naruto. As he meditated, Irika focused on the chakra in the room. Whereas his chakra was orderly and calm, Naruto's chakra was reasonably massive and bubbly. The boy's chakra seemed to be best described as a surface of an agitated body of water. Irika was very impressed that Naruto had been able to get his chakra control down to this point. When the two of them had first started the mediation sessions, Naruto's chakra could at best be described as a raging bonfire. It was powerful but wild and uncontrolled. At first, Irika had been worried that he would see traces of the Kyuubi's chakra bleeding off into Naruto's chakra. A part of Irika had suspected that the Kyuubi might have been responsible for Naruto's lack of control and massive chakra supply. Luckily, in Irika's opinion, that was not the case, and it was just that Naruto was naturally very powerful. Slowly, and much to Irika's pleasure, Naruto's chakra calmed down and started to seem like a reasonably still pond. If Naruto could continue to hold his chakra in this state, it was conceivable that Naruto would finally be able to gain the control the boy needed in order to pass the Genin exam. True, Naruto would only have average control over his chakra compared to his fellow students. However, in real terms, that would grant Naruto the power of a high Chunin or low Jonin in terms of chakra supply. While still focusing on his own meditation, Irika slowly counted the amount of time that Naruto was able to hold his chakra in that position. Irika was getting ready to end his meditation session and suggest that he and Naruto head out of Teriyaki when Naruto did something that completely surprised Irika. Naruto's chakra, which had a very vivid and deep blue color to it, suddenly shifted its color to a pale blue-white. This sudden shift in the color of Naruto's chakra completely shocked Irika and caused him to fall out of his meditative state. Shaking his head to get over the shock, Irika stood up and walked over to being in front of Naruto. Irika leaned over and gently shook Naruto's shoulder. Naruto slowly responded to Irika's shaking by grunting and opening his eyes. To Irika's immense shock, Naruto's eyes had changed. The boy's normal sky blue eyes were now the same vivid orange that Naruto liked so much. On this orange background, in each eye, Naruto had what looked like 8 spokes of equal lengths joined together like a map compass or a star. These stars in Naruto's eyes were both imperial purple in color. Irika was completely shocked that Naruto had what seemed to be a bloodline. All Naruto's big brother could think was that Naruto needed to know what had happened to him and that the Hokage needed to be informed about this development. Sarutobi was calmly sitting in his seat in his office, smoking his pipe while looking at the confused Naruto and Irika sitting across from him. The old Hokage took a deep breath, removed his pipe from his mouth, and exhaled a puff of smoke. Putting down his pipe, Sarutobi looked Naruto in the eyes, which still had their bloodline activated, and smiled. "Naruto," Sarutobi began to speak. "I knew that eventually I would have to have this conversation with you. I just wasn't expecting to have it with you at such a young age. As is plainly obvious, the Uzumaki clan does have a bloodline. The name of your bloodline is the Rinnegan, otherwise known as the Chaos Star Eye. Naruto, I know that you have repeatedly asked me to tell you about your family, and I am truly sorry for not telling you about your parents. You see, both of your parents were powerful ninjas and wonderful people. Sadly, they both had some powerful enemies, so your father, before he died, asked me to keep your heritage a secret until you've met certain conditions. According to your father's wishes, I can't tell you right now about his side of your family. However, I am permitted to tell you about your mother's family because it is from her that you get your bloodline." Both Irika and Naruto grew more interested in what Sarutobi was saying when he mentioned that he was allowed to talk about Naruto's mother. Without bothering to stop talking, Sarutobi continued, "Your mother, Naruto, was Kushina Uzumaki. Kushina came to Konoha when she was 14 years old from the destroyed village hidden among the whirlpools seeking sanctuary. I granted her sanctuary, and she quickly rose in the ranks to become one of the better jonins in Konoha's employment. You and your mother are so alike, Naruto, in how you look at and handle the world. Both of your cheerful attitudes are very refreshing to those who have to deal with the harsh world that is a ninja's lot in life. Sadly, she died during the Kyuubi attack due to a combination of a complicated pregnancy and the severe lack of medical personnel and supplies because of the attack. Don't be upset, Naruto. I was told that the nurse who was with Kushina as she died happily and was proud that you were born." Sarutobi took a second to just smile at Naruto, and then the old ninja reached into his desk and pulled out a thick hardback book. After setting the book down in front of Naruto, Sarutobi continued to speak. "Although your mother showed me her Dojutsu several times and told me its name, she didn't talk about it and what it did. She said that such things like a bloodline limit were merely tools and deserved no more notice than a kunai or a sword. While she didn't like the attention that bloodlines have in Konoha, she did understand the need for information on the bloodlines to be kept secure. Kushina gave me this book when she and her husband found out that she was pregnant with you. I was instructed to hand this book over to you if neither of your parents lived and when you activated your bloodline or you found out about your heritage. Naruto looked down at the table and focused on the cover of the book. There were 3 words written on the cover in purple letters and descending order: Uzumaki, Clan, and Codex. In between Uzumaki and Clan was the spiral shape that Naruto had been told was his clan emblem. A drawing of the Rinnegan was between the words Clan and Codex. For a boy who had never known his parents, the book seemed to be worth more than anything else that Naruto had ever seen. That book represented a connection to something that Naruto had always wanted: a family. Naruto gently picked the book up and clutched it tight to his chest. A grandfatherly smile slowly spread across Sarutobi's face. The old Hokage considered Naruto to be as much of a grandson to him as Konohamaru was. Being able to give Naruto such a precious gift as that book represented was something Sarutobi had wanted to do for a while. Wanting to wrap this business up so that Naruto could go read the Uzumaki clan codex, Sarutobi said, "Naruto, after you read your clan book, would you please tell me what your bloodline allows you to do? It would help me when I have to place you and your classmates on genin teams if I know what your abilities are." Also, Sarutobi stopped for a second to pull out a small scroll and hand it to Naruto. "I know how hard you've been working to try and get the clone jutsu under control. From what Irika has told me, it sounds like you just have too much chakra to be able to do the jutsu well enough to pass the academy standards, so I found this more advanced version of the clone jutsu for you." Curious as to what technique Sarutobi was giving him, Naruto opened the scroll to see Shadow Clone Jutsu written as the heading. Naruto looked straight into Sarutobi's eyes as if asking his grandfather for an answer. As if to answer Naruto, Sarutobi started to explain himself. This jutsu requires a far greater amount of chakra compared to the regular clone technique to work. Kushina actually brought that technique to Konoha with her. She told me that the Uzumaki had invented the technique so that they could have a reliable clone technique to use. Please don't share that technique with your classmates. It is extremely dangerous for the average ninja below Chunin rank. Naruto nodded his head to show that he understood what Sarutobi was telling him. It was late at night and Naruto was currently reading the Uzumaki clan codex in his bed. The codex started off telling him the origin of the Uzumaki clan. According to the codex, there were once 3 brothers who had studied under the 6 Realm Sage. Once the brothers' training was complete, the 6 Realm Sage took the 3 brothers to a sacred shrine. Naruto's ancestor had apparently never written down where this shrine was and what exactly happened there. All that his ancestor had told Naruto's forefathers about what happened at that shrine was that the brothers were offered a choice by the spirit of the shrine. The choice was a simple one: which do you seek the most, power, prestige, or knowledge? The youngest brother had chosen power as his answer and would go on to found the Uchiha clan. Prestige was the option of choice to the middle brother, and that person would go on to eventually founding the Hyuga clan. Finally, the eldest brother, Naruto's ancestor, had given the answer that he sought knowledge. Once the 3 brothers' answers were given to the spirit that the shrine was dedicated to, the brothers and their teacher left the shrine. Shortly after they left their teacher and the shrine, a quarrel broke out between the 3 brothers. That quarrel caused the 3 brothers to each go his separate way and, although they did stay in contact via letters, never see each other again. The eldest brother eventually came to what would become the land of whirlpools, and he established a hermitage. It was after several years in seclusion that Naruto's ancestor had developed the very first Rinnegan. Over the next decade after the Rinnegan appeared, Naruto's ancestor started to pick up some students. Eventually, a rather timid girl who was recorded as being the daughter of a local farmer captured the elder brother's heart, and the 2 were married. This happy couple only had 1 child, a cheerful and energetic son that they named Jimmu. Jimmu would apparently go on to spend his life fighting to protect the land of whirlpools from various bandits and even modern ninjas that were starting to show up. It was Jimmu that gave the family the name of Uzumaki. According to the family tree in the book, Jimmu Uzumaki was Naruto's great-great-great-great-grandfather. After the family history, the Uzumaki clan codex went on to explain the Rinnegan in great detail. Naruto's ancestors divided the Rinnegan's abilities into 2 categories: youngling's abilities and parental abilities. This distinction, Naruto read, was because there was a major change that occurred to a Rinnegan bearer when the bearer first sired a child. While both sets of eyes looked exactly the same, a parental Rinnegan had expanded abilities that the younglings couldn't access. Besides a sharpening of the eyesight, the Rinnegan had 2 main abilities. The first ability was that with the Rinnegan a person could remotely look at something, even things that behind the user or in a building. It wasn't like the Hyuga's all-seeing Byakugan, as the Rinnegan only allowed you to see what was going on as if you were physically in the spot you were remotely looking from. Secondly, and in Naruto's opinion even more impressively, a person with the Rinnegan could actually look into the future. This wasn't like the Sharingan, which only allow a person to make very accurate guesses from what could be seen, but actual prescience abilities. As cool as the ability to actually look into the future was, in Naruto's opinion, it wasn't without some troubles. First off, there was the fact that the Rinnegan could only see up to a minute into the future. It was biologically impossible for the eye to see even a second further into the future. The next, and really the biggest, trouble with the Rinnegan was that when he was looking into the future, he wouldn't be able to see what was going on now. True, Naruto could choose how far into the future he could view or simply choose not to use that particular ability of the Rinnegan. However, Naruto didn't want to cut off such a major part of his bloodline. Luckily for Naruto, the Uzumaki clan codex listed several mental exercises that would allow him to use the Rinnegan's prescience abilities in a fight without getting confused. Curious as to what a parental Rinnegan was capable of doing, Naruto turned the page. According to the codex, a parental Rinnegan gained the ability to use 3 very powerful jutsus. Genesis was a jutsu that allowed the caster to create, awaken, or enhance a bloodline in a person as long as it wasn't another Rinnegan bearer. Golgotha allowed a person to transfer chakra from one person or group to another person or group. This technique was useful in battle because its caster could drain his opponent's chakra dry and give the chakra to an ally without even touching the person. Finally, there was the dreaded Megiddo, a technique that could completely destroy the chakra system and/or the bloodline of a person that was targeted by the jutsu without actually killing the person. Naruto felt a pain in his heart as he read the techniques that would have been available to his mother had she survived. With jutsus like those 3, she would have been able to stop the villagers from attacking him. Golgotha and Megiddo could have been used to stop those rioting villagers from attacking, while Genesis would have commanded such respect that no one wanting a bloodline would dare to hassle him. As soon as those thoughts entered Naruto's mind, he quickly stomped on them. He could see why his mother had been very quiet about her bloodline. If Kushina had revealed the Uzumaki bloodline, she would have been either feared or respected only for the Rinnegan. Naruto figured that even if the villagers knew of the Rinnegan, they still wouldn't respect him. They might possibly respect his clan name like they did with Sasuke, but they wouldn't respect him as an individual. While that situation might be wonderful for Sasuke, Naruto knew that it wasn't for him. He wanted to be recognized for his own person and not just because of who he might be descended from. Right then and there, Naruto vowed not blab about the Rinnegan but only use it during training or when he was on a mission that needed it to be used. Letting out a small yawn, Naruto figured that it was time for him to go to bed. Naruto opened up the drawer of his nightstand and reverently put the Uzumaki clan codex in the empty drawer. After closing the door, Naruto turned off the light and put his head to his pillow. He would, after all, need a good night's rest so that he could be at his best tomorrow morning. Graduation was coming up in 2 months and Naruto figured that he would need all available time to train that he could. Iruka and Naruto were currently sitting in Iruka's kitchen, both having a cup of tea. When Naruto had come to class that morning, he had been quieter and more subdued than the boy usually was. Since he had spent so much time with Naruto, it wasn't hard for Iruka to figure out that Naruto's attitude change was because of the boy finding out about the Uzumaki clan. Worried about his little brother, Iruka calmly said, "Naruto, how are you holding up after what you found out yesterday?" Naruto let out a small sigh before he smiled and said, "I'm doing reasonably well, Iruka. The Uzumaki clan codex has a lot, and I mean a lot, of information on my clan and the Rinnegan." Seeing Iruka's curious face, Naruto continued to talk. "Did you know that the Uzumaki, the Uchiha, and Hyuga are all descended from 3 different brothers who trained under the 6th Realm Sage? I bet you never imagined something like that before. Or the fact that the Uchiha are descended from the youngest of the 3 brothers, while my clan, on the other hand, is in fact descended from the oldest of the 3. Naruto cracked a slightly wider smile as he looked at Iruka's shocked face. That little revelation of Naruto's had completely shocked the scarred Chunin. The origins of the Uchiha and the Hyuga clans had always been a complete mystery to Iruka or any other person that Iruka had talked to about those clans. Both the Uchiha and the Hyuga were notoriously tight-lipped when it came to the origins of their clans. In fact, it had been whispered by some people that the Uchiha and Hyugas themselves didn't know of the origin of their clans and their bloodlines. The most popular and widely accepted theory among the Konoha ninjas was that the Sharingan and thus the Uchiha clan was an offshoot of the Hyuga clan. Personally, Irika had never believed this theory as it had too many variables and inconsistencies for his tastes. To have that particular mystery solved greatly pleased Irika, who was a closet detective novel fanatic. Although he was pleased with having that mystery solved, Irika became very worried for Naruto. The political ramifications for Konoha if the origin of the Rinnegan, Sharingan, and Byakugan became common knowledge were immense. While some of the nastier parts of Konoha would be enraged that the demon brat was connected to two noble clans, that was not what worried Irika. By the laws of Fire Country and thus Konoha clans could only separate under certain rare circumstances. Unless the Uzumaki clan codex had a written account of one of these very limited circumstances happening, then there were in fact no Hyuga or Uchiha clans. At least, the Hyuga or Uchiha clans wouldn't exist in a legal sense. From a legal standpoint, the Hyuga and Uchihas were in fact Uzumakis with Naruto as their clan head. If Naruto chose to reveal this fact, he would automatically become a chieftain and would, despite any protests that people would be sure to throw, have all of the political power that the Uchiha and Hyuga clans had accumulated. Looking over at Naruto, Irika could see that Naruto was well aware of this fact. If this had been the Naruto of a year ago, Irika was sure that the boy would have been yelling this fact out as loud as he could. However, for Irika's peace of mind, Naruto had greatly matured since the two of them had started to have their private lessons. The Naruto sitting calmly in front of Irika was able to accept what the facts he had revealed meant and their potential consequences if they ever got widespread. Given Naruto's dislike for Sasuke and how a majority of the Hyuga clan acted, Irika was sure that Kakashi would sooner step into a gay bar with Guy than Naruto would admit in his connection to those two clans in public. A small part of Irika was however disappointed that Naruto wouldn't likely admit of his real position. Irika would have done a year's worth of D-ranked missions without pay just to see the looks on Hayashi's face when the old stiff was told that he wasn't in fact a clan leader but had to obey Naruto. Brushing that amusing thought away from his mind, Irika locked eyes with Naruto and said, "So Naruto, what does the Rinnegan do? Given the powers that the Byakugan and the Sharingan hold, I'm sure that the Rinnegan is nothing to laugh at. If there is anything that I can do to help you train in your bloodline's abilities, I would be glad to help." Figuring that if anyone besides Grandpa Sarutobi to know what the Rinnegan could, it would be Irika, Naruto started to explain it. At first, Irika was a bit confused at the remote viewing capacity of the Rinnegan. Naruto then explained that it was supposed to be somewhat similar to a ventriloquist throwing their voice, except in this case Naruto was throwing his eyesight. Privately, after the remote viewing abilities were explained to him, Irika thought that the Rinnegan was better for spying purposes than either of its brother Dojutsus. While the remote viewing ability amazing to Irika, he had been completely shocked when Naruto revealed the Rinnegan's ability to actually see into the future. For a second, Irika thought that Naruto was pulling his leg. After all, how could someone see the future when their own actions would have an effect on what they were seeing? Naruto explained that from what he had read, the Rinnegan actually saw all of the possible futures, and that it was this constant exponential growth of possible futures that had created the biological limit of 60 seconds on how far into the future could be seen. The Uzumaki clan codex had gone on, or so Naruto told Irika, to state that there were unique changes in the part of the Uzumaki brain where the senses were processed. These unique adaptations were what allowed the Uzumaki to locate the true path of the future and would automatically adjust the path of the future that was seen as conditions changed. Once the explanations were over, the two almost brothers sat in silence for a few minutes. The silence was ended when Naruto looked up from his tea and said in a somber tone, "Irika, when I die, destroy my eyes." Seeing the shocked and horrified look on Irika's face, Naruto continued, "Listen to me, bro. The Rinnegan can't be used by a non-Uzumaki. This isn't a matter of pride. It's a biological fact. In the history of the Uzumaki clan, there were 3 attempts to transplant the Rinnegan from a fallen clan member to a non-clan member who deemed worthy of our bloodline. Each and every attempt ended with poor recipient going mad and quickly dying afterwards of severe brain hemorrhaging. After the 3rd attempt, it was declared that no more attempts were to ever be made. Only a fellow blood Uzumaki can receive a transplanted Rinnegan without suffering ill effects. Please, Irika, you and I know what would happen if I die without heirs." Irika thought long and hard over Naruto's grim request. As much as Irika didn't want to admit it, he knew exactly what Konoha's council would do if Naruto died. They would promptly order Naruto's eyes to be removed from his cooling corpse and immediately given to deserving ninjas. The greedy members on the council had tried to do the same thing immediately after the Uchiha massacre. Most of the ninja, including Kakashi to the surprise of some non-shinobi, of Konoha had been completely disgusted with the proposal. They all, although they would never admit it to the civilians, had offered thanks to the kami that Itachi had coated his blades with a special chemical that sped up the decay rate in his fellow Uchiha's eyes so that the eyes were useless. It was one thing to study a corpse to learn what medications were used on it or even what techniques the person favored, but it was an entirely different thing to use a corpse as spare parts. Finally, Irika came to a decision. He would honor and fulfill his little brother's wish if it ever came to that. It would, after all, be the best Irika could do to help make Naruto's passing into the next world as comforting as such a thing ever possibly happened to the boy. Naruto was the kind of person who never wanted to hurt someone if he didn't have to, and the thought that he could potentially hurt two innocent people after death must not have sat well with the boy. Taking Naruto's hand into his, Irika firmly said, "Have no fear, Naruto. If that even ever comes up, I will destroy your eyes." As Irika expected, Naruto cheered up immensely once he had made the promise to the boy. Wanting to completely erase the somber air that was hanging around in the room, Irika said, "Let's go out and train, Naruto. You need to learn how to use the Rinnegan after all." Tenten was currently taking an early morning walk through the wooded outskirts of Konoha. Her team had completed yet another C-ranked mission a few days ago and had been given some downtime by Sarutobi. Normally during her downtime, Tenten would get to spend hours playing her favorite game of try and skewer the green guy clone. Sadly, Lee was stuck at home sick with the flu. Usually when she didn't have Lee around to help train with, Tenten could count on Niji being around to train with. However, Tenten's luck failed her again today because Niji had to stay home to take care of some private clan matter. Since she didn't have any training partners, Tenten had decided to just relax and take a walk for an hour or so. As Tenten was enjoying the comforting sounds of the forest, she faintly heard the sound of a fight going on. Curious as to what was going on, Tenten followed the sounds of the fight. Her ears led Tenten straight to the edge of a small meadow, and Tenten was surprised at what she saw happening in that field. Right there in the field was Irika, her old teacher, and a blonde boy that she couldn't quite play sparing. While the spar was happening in front of her, Tenten was reminded of what Guy had once said regarding Irika. Her annoyingly lovable Jonin sensei had told Team Guy once that Irika was generalist specialist. It had taken some work, but Tenten had been able to get Guy to explain that oxymoron. Guy had been trying to tell them that Irika, even though he was only a chunin, was able to defeat the average Jonin because of the fact that he had well-rounded skills. Apparently a lot of Jonin in Konoha respected Irika because of the fact that the man had made a point to not specialize in one or two fields but to equally increase all of his ninja abilities. If Tenten had been surprised to hear that about her friendly old teacher, she was astonished to see the proof of it happening right in front of her. As Irika fought against his currently unknown to her opponent, Tenten could see that all of that praise was very much deserved. Her aunt and uncle had at one time mentioned that Irika had been handpicked by the Hokage himself to be an academy teacher. Given how he handled his class when she was at the academy and the skill that Irika was showing here, Tenten could believe that rumor. Irika's taijutsu form and abilities weren't as good as Guy's, but Irika easily mixed up his physical attacks with weapons use and a good helping of ninjutsu. Unlike other chunin that Tenten had been able to watch sparing, Irika seemed to stick to only C, D, and even E rank jutsus. At first, Tenten thought that Irika was limiting himself because of the fact that his partner could only be a genin at most. However, as she watched the spar progress, Tenten quickly discarded that idea. Whoever Irika's opponent was, it was obvious to Tenten that he was good. The unknown blonde seemed to know exactly what Irika was going to do before her old teacher did something. Irika's opponent used a strange taijutsu style that could best be described in Tenten's mind as the strength and ferociousness of the iron fist, mixed in with the flexibility and grace of the gentle fist. Overall, it was a very good show for Tenten, as she liked how both teacher and student were using a great variety of moves, most of them relatively low-level jutsus, and using them in extremely creative ways. Although she was a weapon specialist, Tenten had tried not to over-specialize and go after one or two flashy techniques like most genin nowadays seem to like to do. Suddenly, to Tenten's surprise, Irika suddenly called out, "All right, Naruto, you're defiantly able to handle fighting at 10 seconds. I want you to go up to 12 seconds now and come at me with everything you've got." This statement of Irika's greatly confused Tenten. What on earth did Irika mean that his opponent, Naruto, she silently corrected herself now having a name for the boy, was able to handle fighting at 10 seconds? Irika and Naruto's spar suddenly became even more confusing to Tenten as she observed that Naruto suddenly wasn't performing like he was earlier in the fight. Oh, the boy's skill was still there, but it seemed that his timing and reflexes had been thrown off. Completely confused by this, Tenten quietly slipped away to go tell Guy about this. Hopefully, Tenten was praying Guy would be able to explain what she had just seen without ranting too much about the power of youth. 40 minutes after Tenten left the meadow, Irika and Naruto, neither of whom knew that their private training time had been observed, were sitting down on a log sharing a bottle of water. Irika had been taking Naruto to this out-of-the-way meadow as often as he could for the past month to help Naruto train with the Rinnegan. Sarutobi himself had actually recommended this area as it was well out of the usual paths of people who went into the forest. Neither Irika nor Naruto complained about the location, as was perfect for Irika to help Naruto. Specifically, Irika was helping Naruto learn how to use what the two had privately dubbed the seer sight aspect of the Rinnegan. Naruto was more than able to train himself in his apartment on how to look into the future or to use the remote viewing abilities of the Rinnegan. However, just seeing the future was not enough to ensure Naruto's control of the Rinnegan, especially in a combat situation where, due to the increased number of variables, it was harder to see further into the future. In the quiet of his apartment, Naruto could look out his window and gaze a full minute into the future. But when Naruto used the prescience abilities of the Rinnegan to watch a spar, he could barely see 20 seconds into the future. One time a week ago, Irika took Naruto over to observe two Chunin teams practicing in a mock battle. After the Chunin's practice was over, Naruto had privately told Irika that he had only been able to see 5 seconds into the future during the fight. At first, Irika had been confused at the decreasing time in Naruto's sight that Naruto was describing. Irika could easily grasp the fact that in each instance that the reduction in Naruto's sight was caused by the increasing amount of variables that Naruto's Rinnegan had to observe. It was confusing Irika was the fact that the Rinnegan had that 60-second ceiling maximum. 60 seconds on the battlefield held infinitely more variables than 60 seconds spent peacefully at home. So why was it that if you could see 60 seconds into the future on the battlefield, you couldn't beyond 60 seconds while at home? Naruto had told Irika when he asked that question that the Uzumaki clan had been stumped by that question and had given up trying to solve the answer. The 60-second limit was just a fact of life with the Rinnegan. Besides, since when did looking into the future follow any laws of logic? Naruto, who had just finished off the water bottle, turned to Irika and said with a big smile, "So Irika, how did I do? What do you think of my reconstruction of the Yuzu Senken, Thousand Fists of the Whirlpool, style?" At the back of the Uzumaki clan codex, there had been several storage seals that were set to open only to Naruto or a descendant of his if the boy had had one. Inside the storage seals, Naruto had discovered a small library of books. Among the books was a book containing the Uzumaki clan taijutsu style with step-by-step instructions to take someone new to taijutsu all the way up to a grandmaster level. Irika turned to look down at his younger brother and gave Naruto a big smile before starting to go into an in-depth analysis. Overall, Naruto, I would have to say that you're doing great in the Yuzu Senken, and that overall your taijutsu level right now is mid to high genin bordering on low chunin level. As for using your Rinnegan, I must say that I'm impressed with your control and ability. Just remember to not go past 10 seconds for now if you're in a fight for real. Given your consistent performances in both in class and privately with me, I know that you have the genin test in the bag. Guy, the great beautiful green beast of Konoha as he would describe himself, was walking into the Hokage Tower with a surprisingly serious look on his face. As Guy walked through the corridors, every ninja that could scurried away from him. They weren't running from killing intent, of which Guy was producing none, but from the instinctive knowledge that they didn't want to get in his way. Something in the back of their brains was telling them that if they got in Guy's way now, they would wish that they had been forced to watch that infernal sunset of Guy's for 10 hours straight. Ignoring the protests of the Hokage's secretary, Guy walked into Sarutobi's office and slammed his hands on the old leader's desk. Sarutobi looked up from the paperwork that he was previously doing to stare at Guy's frowning face. In his usual dignified voice, Sarutobi calmly said, "Yes, Guy. Is there something that I can do for you?" Guy stared down into Sarutobi's eyes and said in a surprisingly harsh tone for Guy, "Yes, there is something you can do, Lord Hokage. Explain." There was a slight confusion in Sarutobi's eyes as the old leader couldn't quite figure out what Guy wanted an explanation of. Before Sarutobi could voice his confusion, Guy clarified his demand. "I've just had an interesting conversation with my student Tenten. She was walking through the woods today and stumbled upon Irika and a certain boy named Naruto sparring. As she watched their spar, she heard Irika say, and I quote, 'You're defiantly able to handle fighting at 10 seconds. I want you to go up to 12 seconds now.' Why, Lord Hokage, did you not inform me that Lady Kushina-sensei's child had survived?" Sarutobi took a deep breath as he had known that this conversation would have to eventually happen. Inwardly, Sarutobi was cursing his luck that it was Guy and not Kakashi that he was having the conversation with first. Now he had to pay off half of Tsuanda's gambling debt. It just wasn't fair. Tsunade was the legendary sucker and almost never won. shoving all thoughts of how he was going to avoid the poorhouse to the back of his mind for the moment. Sarutobi collected his thoughts and prepared to answer Guy. Thanks to the Kyuubi attack, all of the people that Naruto's parents had requested in their wills to take care of the boy were dead. If I had told either you or Kakashi that Naruto had lived, you both would have demanded custody. Both of you were only 14 years old at the time and totally incapable of raising a child. Even you two had decided to team up. The courts would have ruled that Naruto be placed into state custody. Thus Naruto would be right where he technically is now, except that he would have to deal with IWA assassins all the time and would be a bone of contention among the greedier of the council members. Only I, Jiraiya, Suanda, the head doctor of the hospital, and the fire daimyo know Naruto's full heritage. Naruto and Iruka only know of Naruto's maternal heritage, and that's because Naruto has activated his bloodline limit. Guy silently listened to Sarutobi's reasons for keep Naruto's survival a secret and had to admit that they were good ones. As much as he wanted to deny it, Guy knew that Sarutobi had made the best call that the old man could. Taking a deep breath, Guy said, "Does Naruto know of the burden he carries?" Sarutobi shook his head, and Guy figured that Sarutobi would reveal that fact and Naruto's full heritage to the boy when it was best for the boy. Before Guy left the Hokage's office, he called out over his shoulder, "I have Lady Kushina-sensei's twin Kadachi set at my house. They'll be at Naruto's doorsteps by sundown, or I'll do 10,000 laps around Konoha on my hands." Naruto approached Grandpa Sarutobi's office and wondered why he had been summoned. Iruka had privately whispered into Naruto's ear as Naruto was getting his forehead protector that Gramps wanted to see him privately after class was over. Currently Naruto was wearing baggy black pants, his forehead protector, and a black t-shirt that covered by his black with orange patches jacket. At Naruto's sides attached to his belt were Gideon and Joshua, his mother's Kodachi that had mysteriously appeared at his apartment a month ago. All Naruto knew about how they had come to him was a note that said that someone had been keeping them safe and that it was time for them to be returned to their rightful owner. Gramps' secretary politely nodded her old head and motioned for Naruto to go on into the Hokage's office. Sarutobi had a smile on his face as he watched Naruto enter into his office. His unofficial grandson always managed to bring a smile to Sarutobi's face, and that was a gift that Sarutobi found quite precious in his old age. This was the first time that Sarutobi was seeing Naruto with his forehead protector proudly marking the young man as one of Konoha's shinobi. At that moment, Sarutobi was reminded of a moment years ago when Jiraiya had proudly introduced his own genin team to Sarutobi. That thought pained Sarutobi as he thought about how it was supposed to be Minato here proud at Naruto's accomplishments. With a wave of his hand, Sarutobi motioned for Naruto to sit down in the seat available. Once Naruto was comfortable, Sarutobi started to talk. "I can't tell you how proud your parents would have been to have seen you as you currently are, Naruto. Your growth this past year at the Ninja Academy, once certain problem areas were pointed out to you, has been tremendous. In fact, your personal and professional growth has impressed several teachers at the academy who I am told had previously given up on you, calling you a lost cause. Coming for such obstinate mules as these people who said this to me is, in my opinion, a bigger title of distinction than the overhyped title of Rookie of the Year. Seeing the sparkle in Naruto's eyes when he had told the boy these things brought a good deal of mirth to the old Hokage. In his old age, Sarutobi had long ago realized that it was the small things like this that made life worth living. He felt terrible for what he was about to tell Naruto, but Sarutobi knew that Naruto needed to know about this fact. Better by far for the boy to learn about this secret from a friendly person now than latter in a worse situation from someone who might have a grudge against Naruto. Taking a deep breath, Sarutobi felt a sad smile cross his lips, and he looked into Naruto's eyes and began to speak. "Naruto, there is something that I need to talk to you about. Sadly, this isn't something joyful like telling you about your mother was or tell you who your father was will be. You see, Naruto, things didn't go exactly like we teach in school with regards to the defeat of the Kyuubi. While it is true that the Yondaime did defeat the Kyuubi, it wasn't as clear-cut a victory as things are portrayed. The Yondaime didn't kill the demon, but rather locked Kyuubi away forever at the cost of the Yondaime's soul. To make sure that the Kyuubi's soul could never escape from the seal he had locked the demon in, the Yondaime was forced to seal the demon into your body shortly after you were born. Never think for a moment, Naruto, that you are the demon you keep locked away. Despite what some ignorant criminals might try to claim, you are your own person and the son of two people who were very dear to me. It has been my eternal shame that there are a lot of people in Konoha who are hostile towards you solely for what you have been forced to carry. The Yondaime, as his final wish, had requested that people respect you as the hero who continuously keeps the Kyuubi from harming us. Your generation does not know about the part you have played in their safety because I wanted you to grow up as normal you possibly could. Naruto sat where he was in silence for a moment as he thought about what he had just been told. For a second Naruto had been shocked and angered that the yondaime had done this to him. However, Naruto's mental training allowed him to see that the yondaime had done what was necessary to save the village, and that for some reason the yondaime had picked him to carry the Kyuubi. Letting out a small sigh, Naruto shook his head before he said, "Thank you for telling me this, Grandpa Sarutobi. I guess that explains the emergence of my second bloodline." At this point, Sarutobi was completely shocked at what he had just heard Naruto say. Second bloodline? How is such a thing possible? Looking wide-eyed at Naruto, Sarutobi said, "Naruto, what are you talking about? People can't have two bloodlines, it's impossible. Every attempt in Konoha's medical history of trying to join two bloodlines together has always resulted in a stillborn or a child who died after only a few years of agony." Giving Sarutobi his trademark fox grin, Naruto said, "Gramps, all of those attempts that you've mentioned were doomed the moment they were foolishly concocted. If you look closely, you will see that all the clans involved in that mess had bloodlines of the same type." There was a confused look on Sarutobi's face, so Naruto continued to explain. "As you know, the Uzumaki clan has over its history been very deeply connected with bloodline formation. Due to this, my ancestors have made many, and I mean many, very meticulous notes on bloodlines and everything that has to do with them. While I have no doubt that the doctors at Konoha's hospital tried very hard to help those poor individuals involved, they just don't have the knowledge that the Uzumaki have in that department. My ancestors long ago broke bloodlines up into 3 distinct classifications: body bloodlines, chakra bloodlines, and finally sense bloodlines. Dojutsus like the Rinnegan or the Byakugan are an example of a sense bloodline. Elemental manipulation like the Shodai Hokages would release and the Hataki white chakra are both prime examples of chakra bloodlines. Finally, you have the believed to be extinct dead bone pulse as an example of a body bloodline. It has been noted that a fertile person can have up to 3 different bloodlines and live a long, healthy life. However, there can only be one bloodline in a person from each separate class that I have mentioned." Sarutobi just sat there in his chair with his mouth hanging wide open. In 2 minutes, Naruto had completely thrown out over 100 years of medical study and wisdom, and the boy was acting like he was talking about the weather. What made the whole situation so painful was the fact that what Naruto's ancestors had figured out was so blaringly obvious. The only reason that Sarutobi could figure that someone hadn't pointed this out already was the fact that the people involved were mostly trying to find a way to create a new bloodline drawing on the power of parents' bloodlines. Inside his mind, Sarutobi grumbled that only the Uzumaki could figure out a way to pull off something that the rest of the world had labeled impossible. Naruto got up from his chair and started walking towards the door to leave. After he passed Sarutobi's desk, Naruto stopped and said, "Just so you know, my second bloodline is a body bloodline. It grants me the ability to rapidly regenerate the cells in my body by pouring chakra into my cells. While I am by no stretch of the imagination immortal, this bloodline of mine does make me extremely harder to kill. I probably developed it in response to the Kyuubi and the seal that was placed on me to keep it from escaping. Well, I've got to go. Have fun figuring out which teams I and my classmates are going to be on, Grandpa Sarutobi." The next day, after being told about the Kyuubi, Naruto was in the Hokage Tower once again. Naruto had to go in today in order to get his ninja identification photo taken. Instead of heading straight home after his business with the record department was taken care of, Naruto headed off to the Hokage's offices. Passing by the Hokage's secretary, Naruto called out, "Good day. I'm here to bring some documents that I know Grandpa Sarutobi will want to have a good look at." Receiving a casual nod from the secretary, Naruto opened the door and went into Sarutobi's office. Once the door was closed, Naruto called out, "Good day, Gramps." Sarutobi looked up from his desk and smiled, seeing Naruto's cheerful face. Before Sarutobi could ask why Naruto was here, the boy said, "During our talk last night, I realized how I was unintentionally hurting this village by keeping all of the Uzumaki clan records to myself." Reaching into his coat, Naruto pulled out a stack of papers that were tied together. Placing the stack of papers on Sarutobi's desk, Naruto said, "I had several shadow clones stay up all night copying these pages out of several clan books. These papers contain the Uzumaki clan notes on how a person can have multiple bloodlines. Also, there are notes on how to make a type of paper that will allow you to determine which of the 3 categories a person's bloodline or bloodlines are." There was a small tear in Sarutobi's eye as he reached over on his desk and picked up the papers that Naruto had put down. It was very rare that a ninja clan, even one as small as the Uzumaki currently were, to ever give a copy of their clan records. Most people thought that the reason why Konoha's libraries contained only E and D ranked jutsus with the uncommon C ranked and very rare B ranked jutsu was due to village security. Actually, the truth of the matter was that none of the clans would give up anything higher than a D ranked jutsu when Konoha was founded. The small supply of C and B ranked jutsus were in the library because of a few generous ninjas like the Shodai who had wanted to help out those without a clan become good ninjas. Sarutobi had placed the precious documents that Naruto had given him into his desk and was about to thank Naruto when the door opened. Into the room came running Konohamaru with a shuriken in his fist and yelling out, "Today's the day I defeat you and become Hokage." Sadly for Sarutobi's would-be defeater, Konohamaru tripped over his scarf. Quickly picking himself up off of the ground, Konohamaru looked around himself. Pointing an accusing finger at Naruto, the little boy called out, "Hey, you tripped me." Now the months of meditation and training with Irika may have calmed Naruto down a great deal, but Naruto still was impulsive and emotional. Most of the time the whiskered boy was able to keep those tendencies of his under control. However, Konohamaru managed to somehow bypass Naruto's self-control. Thus, to Sarutobi's shock and surprise, the old Hokage watched as one of his grandsons started to strangle the other one. Naruto did this by holding Konohamaru up in the air by the little boy's scarf. Looking Konohamaru in the eye as he held the boy up in the air, Naruto said, "Get your facts straight, moron, before you start throwing accusations around." At that point, Konohamaru's private tutor Ebisu came barging into the room looking for Konohamaru. On seeing Konohamaru as he was, Ebisu demanded that Naruto let go of Konohamaru. After Naruto set the boy down, Ebisu started scolding Naruto, stating that Naruto was an uncultured ruffian for treating the Hokage's grandson like he was. Naruto replied to Ebisu's remarks by yelling at the man, "Sir, if I'm an uncultured ruffian, then you're a useless kiss-up. As Konohamaru's teacher, you should be teaching the boy to use his head. Being the relative of a Kage out on the field only means that you're a bigger target for the enemy. Teach the brat to stand on his own instead of hiding in his grandfather's shadow." With that said, Naruto stormed out of the office complaining about self-important nobodies. During Naruto and Ebisu's argument, Konohamaru watched on in silent surprise. Konohamaru was completely surprised at how Naruto had reacted to the news that he was the Sandame's grandson. Everyone that Konohamaru had met outside of his family always treated him with the utmost respect and let him get away with anything he wanted to. It was because of the fact that no one would dare refuse the honorable grandson that Konohamaru had started to pull pranks. He was sick and tired of people just seeing him as the honorable grandson, and had been hoping that eventually someone would snap from his pranks and treat him like a regular kid. To Konohamaru's surprise and joy, he had finally found someone in that blonde-haired whiskered boy who was treating him as his own person. Okay, so being chalked by his scarf while being called a moron in front of his grandfather had been painful and humiliating. As far as Konohamaru was concerned, it was a small price to pay for being acknowledged by his own name instead of honorable grandson. Seeing that Ebisu was going on and on about only he could help Konohamaru succeed his grandfather, Konohamaru quickly ducked out the door to go look for Naruto. 3 hours and 4 escapes from Ebisu after first meeting Naruto in his grandfather's office. Konohamaru was finally able to locate where Naruto had gone to. Currently, Konohamaru was looking out onto a meadow where about 24 Naruto clones were hard at work. A dozen clones were standing up in the trees throwing shuriken at a Naruto on the ground that was busy deflecting the shuriken with 2 kodachi. The other dozen shadow clones were currently mediating on the undersides of tree branches. Finally, there was one Naruto off to the side who was doing sit-ups. Deciding that it would be safest to approach the Naruto doing sit-ups, Konohamaru slowly walked over and said, "Mister, can I talk with you?" Naruto looked up into the slightly nervous face of Konohamaru and said, "Sure, Konohamaru." Getting into a sitting position, Naruto yelled out at the shadow clones in the meadow, "Time's up, boys. Disperse yourselves one at a time in 5-second intervals. I don't want to deal with a headache like last time." Konohamaru watched in amazement as the Narutos in the meadow did exactly as the Naruto sitting next to him told them to. Seeing the look of surprise in Konohamaru's eye, Naruto said, "They're shadow clones. My family on my mother's side has a long history of generating a lot more chakra than other people, but at the same time having a lot less control. Someone in the family came up with this jutsu, and it allows the user to create an actual physical clone instead of an illusion. Everything that the shadow clones learns, I learn when the clones disperse. So what do you want to talk to me about, Konohamaru?" For the next hour, Konohamaru and Naruto talked about things in Konohamaru's life and about both of their dreams to become Hokage. Unknown to Konohamaru, but known to Naruto, who simply pretended otherwise, Ebisu was standing on a tree branch listening to the conversation. At first Ebisu had wanted to come in and take Konohamaru away from Naruto. However, Ebisu had refrained from doing that as he noticed that his charge was practically spilling his heart out in front of Naruto. Ebisu learned more about Konohamaru listening in on that hour-long talk than he had in the past 6 months. At the end of Konohamaru's talk about himself, Naruto, to Ebisu's surprise, said, "I understand where you're coming from, Konohamaru. Both of us want to be recognized for who we are and not what the villagers see when they see us. You want to step out of your grandfather's shadow and not be loved by the villagers only because of the fact that you are the Hokage's grandson. On the other side, I want to step out of scorn that many villagers have for me." Seeing the surprise and confusion on Konohamaru's face, Naruto went on to explain. "You see, Konohamaru, I was born on the exact day of the Kyuubi's attack on Konoha. Because of that fact and my whisker-like birthmarks, I seem to constantly remind people of all those that they lost on that day. Trying to cope with the immense pain that they were dealing with, most of the people in the village directed their feelings on the attack towards me." Konohamaru was completely shocked that such a thing could happen and asked Naruto how he was able to deal with it all. With a smile on his face, Naruto said, "I deal with it one day at a time. Luckily, most people have been able to cool down over the years since the attack. Also, through it all, I was able to find several people who saw past the villagers' anger and saw me for who I was. Your grandfather, who I also consider to be like a grandfather to me, the man at the ramen stand along with his daughter, and finally my old teacher Irika, who I think of like a big brother, all helped me deal with the pressure." Inwardly, Ebisu was quite impressed with Naruto's little speech. The boy had managed to rather skillfully explain his situation to Konohamaru without revealing the secret about the Kyuubi's defeat. Actually, when Ebisu thought about it, Naruto's little cover story was a very solid one and made a note to tell the Lord Hokage about it, so that it could be disseminated throughout the ninja ranks. Soon enough after Ebisu had heard that conversation, he made up his mind. Turning around, Ebisu quietly left the two boys alone. Konohamaru was in good enough hands for now, and it seemed like this conversation was doing the little boy a lot of good. It would be best for things in the long run if he not disturbed the conversation that was going on behind him. 1 month after the Genin graduations, every boy and girl who had passed the academy's exam was heading back to the academy. Today was the day that the graduates would be told what teams they were going to be placed in. Naruto walked into his former classroom and sat down in his old seat. The only thing about Naruto's outfit that had changed since he talked to Sarutobi about the Kyuubi a month ago was the fact that Naruto had a pair of dark sunglasses on his face. This slight change in Naruto's wardrobe was because Naruto had decided that the sunglasses would help hide the fact that he had a dojutsu. Thanks to the Rinnegan's remote viewing abilities, Naruto could set his viewing point just beyond the sunglasses, making it like he wasn't even wearing them. Slowly, as the minutes passed by, the rest of the graduates trickled in by ones and twos. There was a proportional increase in the noise level of the classroom as the number of genin in the classroom increased. With the large amount of people moving about and talking, Naruto figured that this would be a good time to practice using the Rinnegan. Naruto's control over his dojutsu had improved thanks to a month of daily practice with Irika. However, Naruto was still unused to using the Rinnegan in such a chaotic environment. 5 minutes after the last genin to graduate from Naruto's class walked in the door, Irika strolled in with a clipboard in his hand and a smile on his face. That smile rapidly degenerated into an eye tick as Irika stood there at his desk and was completely ignored by most of the genin in front of him. Irika really loved kids and enjoyed working with them, but these graduates should have had the common decency to stop talking when he first walked into the room. Seeing no noticeable diminishment in the noise level of the classroom, Irika used his very own gargantuan head jutsu to get the graduates' attention. Everyone paying close attention to him thanks to the gargantuan head jutsu, Irika smiled and started to talk. "Now that I have everyone's attention, I would like to say a few words. You all may have graduated from this academy and have become ninja, but you have not reached your true destination. As you all know, genin is the lowest level of qualified ninjas in the world. There is a long way for you all to go until you are able to become chunins and hopefully jonins. Your jonin senseis will help you in every way that they can to reach your potential. However, this is a two-person process. Each and every one of you must work with your senseis to bring out the power that rests inside of each and every one of you. Look around you at your fellow graduates. School rivalries, petty grudges, young crushes, and class titles that have been with you throughout your school days. None of those things mean anything in the real world. Despite what you may or may not think, you're all beginners and all equal. These young men and women you see next to you are your fellow shinobi. In the future, you can expect to work with them, bond with them, cry with them, bleed with them, and yes, possibly even die with them. Our lives as shinobi are dangerous and uncertain. Only through the unity of teamwork and our individual strengths are we able to survive in this world. This academy has done its best to prepare you for this harsh life, and I hope to God that none of you precede me into the grave. The mood in the classroom was a somber one for a few minutes as Irika's words hung in the air like a mist. Irika then turned his attention to his clipboard and started calling off teams and team members. For the most part, Naruto was only listening with half an ear as the names were called, waiting for when his team would be called by Irika. Things got interesting when Irika called out Team 7, which was made up of Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and someone called Sai. No one in the classroom knew who Sai was, and so someone asked Irika who Sai was. With a friendly voice, Irika answered, "One of the councilmen has been privately tutoring several potential ninjas in an attempt, or so I've been told, to prove the inadequacies of the ninja academy. While Sai has passed all of the requirements to be a genin, the lack of data on him has caused the Hokage to pair the boy up with Sakura and Sasuke." Everyone in the classroom nodded their heads, assuming that the Hokage had made this arrangement because of the fact that Sasuke was Rookie of the Year and Sakura had earned the title of Top Kunoichi. Personally, Naruto didn't care about why Sarutobi had made that call. What was on Naruto's mind was the fact that there were 27 genins in the classroom, which would mean that someone wouldn't be named to a team here. Naruto was curious as to what would happen to the one genin whose name wouldn't be called. As Irika finished calling out the members of Team 10, Naruto silently cursed his luck. It seemed that the fates had decided to allow Naruto to find out the answer to his question by being the odd man out. Naruto, quite annoyed that no one else in the classroom seemed to have noticed the fact that his name wasn't called, said in a friendly voice, "Sensei Irika, what am I to do since my name wasn't called?" Immediately, the whole classroom was filled up with surprised chatter from many shocked genin. Irika, Naruto, and Shino, all sweat dropped as they watched the gaggling genin. In the back of the three's minds were running one single thought. How could you not have noticed this fact? Managing somehow to resist the impulse to bash his head on the desk, Irika politely coughed into his fist. Once the genin had managed to quiet themselves down, Irika proceeded to answer Naruto's question. "According to the principal who I talked to before I came in here, you're supposed to head up to the roof about an hour before the Jonin senseis arrive. There are 2 other genin, one from each of the other 2 graduating classes this year, who also weren't placed on a team in their home class that will meet you there. The 3 of you are going to form a genin team." At the appointed time, Naruto headed up to the roof as he was directed. Opening the door in front of him, Naruto walked out onto the rooftop just as his 2 new teammates walked out onto the rooftop as well from 2 different exits. To Naruto's left was a girl with long obsidian black hair and who was wearing a plain forest green 2-piece Chinese dress outfit. On Naruto's right was a boy with brown hair in a tapered cut. The boy was wearing brown cargo pants, a white sleeveless button shirt, and had a sword strapped onto his back. Taking one last quick look at his 2 new teammates, Naruto said, "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Would you 2 please tell me your names?" The girl to Naruto left said with a pleasant voice, "Rei Higurashi, Genin, and one of your new teammates." With a friendly bug-gruff voice, the second male on the unnamed team said, "Iori Kusanagi. Hopefully we'll all be able to work together." The 3 young ninjas stood where they were for a minute and then slowly started to walk towards each other. Once they were within arm's reach of each other, they all stopped walking. Naruto lowered himself to the ground and sat down Indian style. Rei and Iori, seeing nothing wrong with what Naruto was doing, quickly, and in Rei's case elegantly, sat down. Opening his mouth, Naruto said in his usual friendly voice, "I think that we should talk about ourselves a bit." Noting the look of surprise in Rei's emerald eyes and Iori's black eyes, Naruto quickly said, "What I meant is that we should get to know each other. Each of us is from a different class, so we know nothing about each other. It would help us in our teamwork if we weren't total strangers." Rei's face had a thoughtful look on it for a moment before she gave Naruto a small smile to show her approval. Iori gave a gruff nod to show his support for Naruto's idea. Thinking about what to tell his new teammates, Naruto closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them. "All right," Naruto said. "I'll go first since it was my idea. I like reading my clan scrolls that Grandpa Sarutobi saved for me, and I dislike close-minded people. My hobbies include practicing my various shinobi skills and hanging out with my old teacher Irika, who I think of like a brother. For the future, my goals are to become a Sannin by some point during Grandpa Sarutobi's successor's reign. After that, I hope to be in a position to reach my ultimate goal of becoming Hokage when the Godame decides to retire." Rei decided to speak next after Naruto was done talking. Allow me to go next. I like landscape paintings and the quiet countryside. On the other hand, I dislike most of the kunoichi that have been graduating these past few years because of their frivolous and naive mindset. My hobbies include studying sealing techniques with my grandfather and meditation. I don't have any lofty goals like Naruto, but currently I am hoping to become a jonin, and I want to help my older brother Katsuhito run my clan when my grandfather dies. Iroi then said in a friendly, but slightly aggressive voice that reminded Naruto of Kiba. So this is the part where I tell you two about me, eh? Alright then. I like hearing about tales of valor and bravery while I hate cowards and people who give up. For hobbies, I would have to say that I like playing shogi and practicing my kenjutsu. My dream is to win back my family sword that Orochimaru stole from my uncle who had decided to remain in grass country when my clan moved to Konoha. For the next hour, the three members of the unnamed team slowly got to know each other and talked about their individual abilities. One thing that had quickly come up was the fact that they were more alike than they had at first thought. All of them had purposely held back their abilities in what they showed at the academy. Their reasons varied as to why they had held back, but each of them was happy that they were on a team containing team members all stronger than the Rookie of the Year. Each of them, it turned out, also was reasonably proficient in a weapon of choice in addition to the standard weapons that the academy trained hopeful ninjas to use. For Naruto, it was his twin Kodachi. Iori was trained in the use of the straight sword on his back, which he claimed was the same balance and weight as his stolen family sword. And finally, Rei was trained to use a naginata. When Iori asked Rei where she hid such a large pole arm, she simply pointed to a bracelet on her wrist. Since Rei had mentioned that she had studied sealing techniques, Naruto and Iori deduced that Rei's bracelet must have a storage seal on it for her naginata. Since it was a time to talk of many things, Naruto figured that his teammates should also know about the Rinnegan. Taking off his sunglasses, Naruto opened his eyes and revealed the 8-pointed purple stars on orange backgrounds that were the telltale sign of the Rinnegan being active. After giving an account of the capabilities and limitations of the Rinnegan, leaving out the 3 abilities of the parental Rinnegan because there was no need to give out that information, Naruto sat back and watched his teammates' reactions. Rei gave a polite thank you to Naruto for revealing that fact about him, and Iori made the comment that most guys would give their right arm to have half of the abilities that the Rinnegan gave Naruto. Once she was done shooting a scolding glare at Iori for inappropriate comment, Rei said, "Since you've told us about that, I guess I shouldn't hold back. You see, the Higurashi family also has a bloodline. The two of you probably haven't heard about the Higurashi bloodline because most of the Higurashi clan have traditionally gone to become shrine keepers instead of ninjas. My bloodline allows me to use a unique chakra release known among my family as Reitun. Spirit release allows me to use jutsu that directly attack a person's chakra reserves and chakra system. The damage done by these attacks can't have the healing process sped up by the use of medical chakra. Also, with training, my bloodline allows me to greatly strengthen or weaken any seal that I can touch." While Iori made a comment about never making Rei angry at him, Naruto was making a private note to talk to Rei in private later. It wouldn't be a good thing for her to accidentally weaken the Yondame's seal. After he was done with his remark about Rei, Iori said, "It seems that the 3 of us surprisingly have yet another thing in common. The Kusanagi have a bloodline that gives us a great deal of control over fire. My family doesn't need to use hand signs to perform a fire jutsu, and the chakra costs of those jutsus are a great deal less for us than they would be for other ninjas. Unfortunately, the Kusanagi, due to the nature of our bloodline, are utterly incapable of performing water jutsus and actually have a great deal of trouble mastering the water walking chakra exercise. My classmates don't know about my bloodline because I didn't want to deal with comments about having a foreign bloodline." In the Hokage office, Sarutobi was looking into his crystal ball on the team bonding happening on the roof of the academy with a big smile. These 3 young ninjas were, whether they realized or not, already laying down the foundations of a great team. Since the final test in order for a genin team to become an official team was one of teamwork, Sarutobi marked down on his notes that they had already passed. What was the point of giving them a test when they had already passed a better one of their own creation? Truly, revealing your strengths to your teammates and then listening as they did the same without any prompting showed that these 3 were ready for the life of being genin of Konoha. Looking up from his crystal ball, Sarutobi saw Chusa Akimichi walk into his office. Very politely, Sarutobi inquired what Chusa thought of his new genin team. "Well," began the gentle jonin, "this is a very interesting team. Usually genins with bloodlines are spread out among various genin teams so that more teams can benefit from the strengths of the various bloodlines. May I inquire, Lord Hokage, why such a team has been constructed?" With a friendly smile on his old face, Sarutobi said, "Yes, this team is highly unusual, but I have good reasons for placing them all together. My first reason is that each of them is a good deal more mature than their classmates how they look at things. Also, each of them is sadly an outcast in their respective classes. Rei, because of her good looks and realistic outlook on the ninja lifestyle, was practically ostracized among the girls of her class, while the boys of the class were after her for her looks only. Iori was teased by his fellow students because of the fact that his parents moved here only a year before he was born and the fact that his family has had their clan sword stolen from them just before he was born. As for Naruto, the causes for his sad state of isolation are known to both of us. Despite these obstacles thrown against them, each of these youths has managed to reach where they are now without becoming jaded or hostile towards their fellow classmates. Part of the reason I think that these three were able to handle these pressures were the fact that they each had people that they could turn to for help. Another thing that these three have done to help themselves cope with the pressure they were under was to fake their actual abilities. Pretending to only be average while we're among the top 5 of their class and getting away with it must have amused the three of them to no end. And they were good at getting away with this. Only their own teachers and the principal of the academy knew or figured out the charade these three were playing. Sadly, all of these facts make it that there would be a great deal of friction if they were placed with a team made up only of their own classmates. I am sure that these three, who are used to hiding their abilities from their classmates, would have trouble opening up about their real abilities to the people they have been hiding from. On the other hand, their classmates would most likely become bitter towards them once these three decided to stop hiding behind their masks. Such a situation, as I know you can see, would only cause a complete breakdown of team unity. Only away from their fellow classmates will these three have a chance to drop their masks and flourish like they are meant to. While I was waiting for you come over here, Chuza, I was observing your new team. There is no need to test them on teamwork, as they have already proven to me that they already have the basic foundation of teamwork required to pass. If you are curious, they've proven themselves to me by opening up about themselves to each other. They are by no means the tight friends that you and the rest of the Inoshikacho trio were at the start of your genin days. But then again, that is to be expected, as they have just met while you and your genin teammates had known each other for years at that point. Chuza nodded his head, fully understanding Sarutobi's motives for this move, and was personally very touched that the Hokage would entrust a team with such potential at him. When he had signed up to be a Jonin sensei, Chuza had been expecting to receive only an average team. It wasn't that he was a weak Jonin. On the contrary, he was one of top-level Jonins. Rather, Chuza's mediocre expectations were because of the fact that his deeds were tied up mostly with the Inoshikacho trio. While the trio's deeds were quite well known, it wasn't the awe-inspiring performance of the Sannin. Also wasn't the individual fame that the Sannin had managed to accumulate even as that team had worked together. With a happy grin on his face, Chuza said, "Don't worry, Lord Hokage, I will make sure that these three become the best that they can be." Rei Higurashi was currently walking home from the Ninja Academy with her thoughts constantly going back to her first team meeting. One thing that Rei was very pleased about was the fact that her teammates didn't seem to be the hormonal idiots that she had had to deal with for the past 2 years. When Rei had first reported to her old classroom for her team placement, Rei had resigned herself to having to put up with the antics of 2 of her admirers. Hearing that she would be placed on a team composed of genin from other classes had filled her with a good deal of hope. Since the various classes in the academy tended to be isolated from each other, there was almost no chance of her 2 teammates being in her fan club. So it had been with hope that Rei had gone up the stairs to meet her new teammates. When she considered her teammates, Rei figured that she had lucked out very well considering what she had been expecting. Naruto was rather friendly and seemed to have a sort of cheerful air about him that Rei found refreshing. Iori was gruff and his attitude reminded Rei of a bear. Friendly if left alone or shown respect, but nasty if angered. To Rei's surprise, she had found that she was able to open up a little bit and be herself with those 2 boys. Actually, when Rei thought about how Naruto and Iori acted compared to her classmates, it would be easier to describe the 2 as young men instead of boys. Whatever the case, Rei had found out in that hour talk that the 3 of them had had that Naruto and Iori were 2 people that she could trust to have at her back, and that was enough for now in that department. Finding out that Chuza Akimichi was her new sensei had been a bit of a surprise for Rei, but yet again it was a pleasant surprise. The Akimichi were one of several clans in Konoha that her grandfather had spoken very highly of to her. Rei knew that this was because the Akimichi were one of the few clans to regularly come to the shrine that the Higurashi family tended in order to offer offerings of thanks to the kami. Unlike several other clans, the Hyuga and the almost destroyed Uchiha quickly came to Rei's mind. The Akimichi were a very humble in nature clan and were known among the shrine tenders for their habit of offering prayers for those ninjas that had departed without exception, even if the ninja was an enemy. While Rei had a general respect for the Akimichi as a whole, She had been curious as to how Chusa was as an individual. Chusa was rather friendly and had sat down to talk with them all. The man's simple speech to the team showed Rei that Chusa would be a good sensei for them. "Hello you guys and lady. I'm Chusa Akimichi and I will be your sensei from here on out. If you ever have a question on something or need some help, I am right here for you. It doesn't matter if the thing you need help on is ninja related or something from your personal lives. I'll be there to help you just the same. Should I not be able to help you for any reason in whatever you need, I will do my best to either find out what you need to know or find someone who can help you." Once Chusa had said his introduction, he had gone on to outline what Team Chusa would be doing for the first 2 weeks. For the first week, the team would be doing nothing but drills and training. Chusa had stated very emphatically that jumping into doing missions, even if they were as harmless and boring as D-rank missions were, without any training and working with each other was a big mistake. He had then gone on to say that D-rank missions didn't really teach team building like a lot of jonin seem to subscribe to. Most D-rank missions, Chusa told them, were basically chores, and that just because you can do a chore together doesn't mean you're able to work together out on the field where it all counts. The second week would still have a lot of drills and team building exercises, but Team Chusa would start to do missions. As Rei approached the gate to the shrine her family lived at, she stopped and thought about what had happened at the very end of the team meeting. When Chusa had dismissed the team, Rei had found Naruto following her down the halls of the academy. She had immediately turned to face Naruto and demanded to know why he was following her. Afraid that she might have been wrong about him, Rei was ready to summon her Naginata for use in the 1000 Years of Pain Jutsu if Naruto was trying to get a date. Rei was surprised that Naruto did not in fact try to get a date from her, but had come to talk on an issue that he had felt he should bring to her attention. Naruto then went on to say that there was a seal that had been placed on him a long time ago, and he wanted to notify her about it. Rei, who enjoyed studying seals of all shapes and sizes, had asked if she could see the seal that Naruto was talking about. Surprisingly, Naruto had refused to show her the seal or mention what the seal was for. When Rei had asked Naruto why he had informed her about the seal, and yet at the same time was so closed-mouthed about it, Naruto had replied, "I told you about the seal to make sure that you don't ever weaken it." Naruto's voice when he had told her this was extremely serious, and his eyes were like cold sentries warning her off. Seeing that, whatever the seal was for, the seal's integrity was of great concern for Naruto, Rei quickly vowed that she would never do anything to knowingly weaken the seal. The relief and gratitude that Naruto showed her after she had made that promise worried Rei. What kind of seal and what could it be doing that made Naruto so worried about it ever weakening? Although Rei would never tell anyone about the conversation she had had with Naruto, Rei had to admit that her curiosity was piqued. Rei knew that this seal of Naruto's was a private matter and that she shouldn't go trying to get the information on it out of Naruto. But Rei also knew that her curiosity, once piqued, made her want to figure out what this seal of Naruto's could be about. Her respect for individual privacy and desire to know what was going on warred within Rei. Eventually, Rei found a compromise that she could live with, which was her spending her free time looking through the family archives on seals. After all, there was a good chance of her either finding records about an instance similar to how Naruto reacted, of which Rei personally doubted, or her finding something else to pique her interest. If in the off chance Rei did find some record that would unravel this mystery for her, she could use the information to help Naruto. Walking into the back door of the family house/bakery, Iori gave a gruff but friendly hello. Iori then walked into the massive kitchen and quickly grabbed one of the small rolls that his mother always set aside for the family. Although the Kusanagi clan had been reasonably well off back in the Land of Grass, the clan had lost a good deal of its wealth when his parents fled from the Land of Grass. From what Iori had managed to get out of his parents, his great-grandfather had tried to take over the hidden village of the Land of Grass. Knowing that the clan could very well be destroyed by that madness, Iori's grandfather had instructed Iori's then newlywed parents to flee to another country. His grandfather had called the situation very well because the bulk of the Kusanagi clan had been killed when Grass retaliated against Iori's great-grandfather. The few Kusanagi and Grass who had survived that massacre were killed off less than a year later by Orochimaru, who had desired the legendary family sword. Neither of Iori's parents had been sad when they had received word that the Grass had slaughtered 90% of the Kusanagi clan. As his father Kenma had explained to Iori and his twin little brothers, those clansmen who had been killed were egotistical and had come to the false belief that the Kusanagi had the right to rule. All who had believed that the Kusanagi were inherently better than their fellow men had all come to pay the price for their hubris. Their names had been blotted out of the family tree and were by Kenma's decree as head of the clan to never be considered part of the clan again. On the other hand, Iori's parents had been absolutely devastated when they had received the news that the rest of the family had been killed by Orochimaru. From what Iori had been told, his clansmen in grass when Orochimaru had attacked were mostly just a few elders along with the little kids that were spared as a reward for the 4 Kusanagi ninjas who had faithfully stood by grass during the Kusanagi coup attempt. According to reports sent over by a sad grass emissary, Orochimaru had ruthlessly killed everyone from the oldest elder to the little cousin that was apparently only 10 days older than Iori was. What had made it even harder on Iori's parents was the fact that half the kills had been done with the Kusanagi family sword itself after Orochimaru claimed the blade. When Iori had finally gotten his parents to explain it all to him 3 years ago, he had felt his pride in his parents rise immensely. Both of them had managed to deal with blows like that and still managed to smile and keep going. Currently, his father was a well-respected member of an ANBU squad, while his mother had actually given up the life of a kunoichi so that she could raise him and his little brothers. Half of Iori's skills as a ninja had been taught to him by his mother when she had a chance to help teach Iori and his little brothers. One thing, though, that had always surprised Iori about his parents, though, was the fact that both of them had vowed never to go after Orochimaru to try and reclaim the family blade. When one of the twins had asked why, Iori's parents had explained that they weren't worthy of carrying the family blade and that only Iori, the twins, and any of their descendants deserved the right to wield the family sword. Finishing off the roll that he had been munching on, Iori turned his head towards the large oven that his mother used to bake the various breads and rolls to sell. Looking at the large oven, Iori's eyes was drawn, as they usually were, to the flames at the bottom of the oven. The flames were all connected and seemingly perfectly smooth, like a single solid block of red that was placed at the bottom of the oven. This was the true power of the Kusanagi bloodline, complete mastery and manipulation of fire. Outsiders mostly just seemed to think that the Kusanagi bloodline was simply an extremely strong affinity to fire with minor chakra cost reductions thrown in. Over the years, the Kusanagi had had to use this incorrect explanation when relating their bloodline to others outside the clan who wouldn't understand. This poor description of the family bloodline had always frustrated Iori because people at times seemed confused that the Kusanagi couldn't use water jutsus and had a great deal of trouble water walking exercise. After all, these ignorant outsiders would said, having an elemental affinity simply means that it's easier to learn and use a certain type of jutsus. Also, those knowledgeable people would continue on to say, water walking is chakra manipulation and not elemental manipulation. It must all be in your heads that you have trouble with these things. Oh, how at times Iori had wished he just used fire style, fire dragon flame projectile on those useless morons and get away with it. The truth of the matter was that the Kusanagi and fire were brethren and partners. At least that's how the Kusanagi had found to best describe their bloodline among themselves. Fire flowed through the veins of every Kusanagi, warming them with its powerful embrace. It freely gave itself to protect and serve each member of Kusanagi, as was shown in the fact that Iori could use a B-rank jutsu such as Fire Style, Fire Dragon Flame Projectile, for about the chakra cost that non-Kusanagi needed to use for the C-rank jutsu Fire Style, Great Fireball Technique. Known masters of fire manipulation spent years and decades training to do what came naturally to the Kusanagi, and very rarely did the masters ever equal the control that the Kusanagi possessed over the flame. This great gift that the Kusanagi had in their bloodline also came with a great price. Water seemed to recognize the Kusanagi as only enemies to be destroyed. Oh, the Kusanagi could have a glass of water, bathe, or swim like normal people. However, the instant a Kusanagi extended his chakra away from his body, water seemed to lash out at the Kusanagi. This was why it was impossible for a Kusanagi to perform water jutsus. As for water walking, Kenma had described walking on water to Iori once as trying to walk while in the middle of a great earthquake. His mother had once told Iori that Kenma had once managed to walk on water for 30 minutes, something that was only average for most jonin but awe-inspiring to the Kusanagi. Thinking back on his new team, Iori let out a small smile. Neither the blonde boy Naruto nor that rather attractive, but not his type of girl, Rei, made any smartass remarks that Iori had come to expect when he revealed the official explanation of his bloodline. Instead, both of his teammates had calmly accepted his explanation of the Kusanagi bloodline and had proceeded to move on to other topics. That made the two of them okay in Iori's book, and he was more than willing to work with them as a genin team. If today's conversation was any indication, Iori was sure that Team Chusa would have a long and successful future. Chusa Akimichi was happily walking into the front door of the Akimichi clan home carrying 2 fresh hogs on his shoulders. His wife had asked him to stop by the butcher's after he was done with his new genin team, and as far as Chusa was concerned, what his wife wanted she would get. Passing through the front door and gently closing it with his foot, Chusa called out, "Honey, I'm home and I've brought home the bacon." Laughing at his little joke, Chuza headed into the kitchen where he knew his loving wife would be. When Chuza walked into the kitchen, he was greeted by his sweet and lovable wife who gave him a big kiss on the lips. Mrs. Akimichi then reached over and took the hogs off of Chuza's shoulders and carried them over to the spit in the open fireplace oven. Since Mrs. Akimichi was technically Chuza's sixth cousin, she had the same stout physique that the Akimichi were famous for. Standing back and out of the way, Chuza watched as his sweet and lovable wife happily prepared the 2 hogs he had brought home. As she was in process of putting on a layer of flavoring onto the hogs, Mrs. Akimichi called out, "So dear, who did you get as your new genin students? What are you planning on giving them as their true genin test?" With a big smile on his face, Chuza crossed his arms over his chest and said in his jovial voice, "I've got a great team, honey. It's kind of different from most teams you or I've run across because they're all from different classes in their year. They're rather interesting because they're all actually a lot stronger than they showed in the academy. In fact, the Lord Hokage seemed rather proud of how strong they all are and how well they managed to hide it during their academy days. At least, he looked very proud of this fact when he mentioned it to me. To make things even more unique, the Lord Hokage told me that giving these kids the second genin test wasn't needed. They had already shown their ability to work together in satisfactory levels by getting to know each other and to start talking about their abilities as ninjas." Mrs. Akimichi was carefully listening to her husband as he talked about his team. She could hear the pride in Chuza's voice as he talked about his team, and she had to admit that his team sounded like it would be a great one. When she heard who was on Team Chuza, Mrs. Akimichi brought her head out of the fireplace and said, "Didn't I tell you that there was something special about that Uzumaki boy? You better make sure that he does well in his studies under you. That poor boy doesn't get the respect that he deserves for what he's been doing for this village. As for the other 2, I've talked to Iori's parents and Rei grandfather. It's really such a shame how all 3 of those kids were treated in the academy. I'm just glad that our Choji never joined in on the teasing that his classmates seemed to enjoy doing so much." Nodding his head, Chuza agreed with everything that his wife said. Chuza, like all Akimichi, never liked judgmental people who teased or shunned other people. This trait came from the fact that the Akimichi tended to get teased a lot as children due to their build. The fact that all 3 of his new students had been teased and made into virtual outcasts had really burned Chuza. Once he knew that little fact, Chuza had become even more determined to help out his new students and show them acceptance and respect. Chuza and his wife turned their heads towards the door when they heard their son Choji start to walk in the door. Choji came walking into the kitchen with his head hung low, prompting Chuza to ask, "What's the matter, Choji?" Looking up at his father, Choji went on to talk about how there was another test that his sensei Asuma was going to give Team 10 tomorrow. Continuing on, Choji stated how Asuma had stated that if they failed the test, then everyone in the team would have to go back to the academy for another year. Finally, Choji had mentioned that this one kid in the classroom, Naruto, was having to team up with complete strangers, and Choji was worried that Naruto wouldn't be able to pass whatever test the boy's sensei gave him. Throughout the boy's entire conversation, Choji had his head hung low in a slight depression. Putting a meaty hand on Choji's slumped shoulders, Chuza said in a jovial voice, "Don't worry, Choji. I have every bit of confidence that you'll pass this test. Just remember, Choji, that the key to the Inoshikacho combo team is the very same key that you need to get past this test. Also, I'm very proud of you, Choji, for your concern in regards to your fellow classmate. That shows strength of character, which is something far more important than strength of body. However, you don't need to worry about Naruto. He's on my new genin team." A few minutes later, Mrs. Akimichi stated that dinner was ready and had Chuza and Choji carry dinner over to the dinner table for her. Promptly at 8 o'clock, every member of Team Chuza showed up at the training field that Chuza had stated would be the team's training field. For the first 2 hours after the team had gathered, Chuza had had Rei, Naruto, and Iori doing various warm-up physical exercises. It was just some basic stuff like sit-ups, push-ups, crunches, stretches, and running many laps around the training field. The 3 genin on the team figured that this part of the training was mostly to help them improve their physical strengths and probably also allowed Chuza to gauge how fit each of them was. Because of this and the fact that Chuza was right there doing the exercises with them, no one complained about doing simple training. After the 2 hours of exercises, Chuza had everyone start to practice their taijutsu. Iori and Naruto had been ready to start sparring with each other when Chuza stopped them. Seeing the confused looks on Iori and Naruto's eyes, Chuza explained that for the first week, Team Chuza was just going to practice their taijutsu forms. Chuza went on to explain that this way each member of the team could practice their taijutsu and at the same time observe their teammates. This way, Chusa stated, each member of the team could start to learn what to expect from their teammates and they could each better challenge each other when they did start to spar. Once the hour of taijutsu practice was over, Chusa basically had the team repeat it but doing kenjutsu this time. There was an hour-long lunch break after the kenjutsu practice was over and Chusa had brought a picnic lunch for the team that Mrs. Akimichi had been kind enough to make. Sitting down in the training field munching on chips, sandwiches, and chips with 2 large bottles of soda to drink, everyone was able to relax and get to know each other better. During the picnic lunch, Chusa told his students various tales from his own genin days. The tales were enjoyable and quite humorous to Rei, Naruto, and Iori. However, they all saw that each of the tales had the moral that teamwork was essential for a ninja team to succeed. Once Team Chusa had finished their lunch, Chusa had each of his students demonstrate and then practice their ninjutsu jutsus. The 3 genin had every E rank and most of the D-ranked ninjutsus that Konoha had at its disposal down fully under their control. While their base ninjutsu skills were mostly equal, the 3 of them had branched out very differently after that point. Iori had concentrated solely on fire jutsus and wielded them with great control. Chusa was only mildly impressed when he saw Iori whip out a fire-style Fire Dragon Flame projectile as his strongest attack. Other jonin might try and label Iori as a prodigy for being able to perform such an attack, but Chusa had made the acquaintance of Kenma a while ago. Thus Chusa knew that Iori was, in Kenma's own words, good but not exceptional in his use of fire jutsus. Naruto's jutsu list both surprised and intrigued Chusa. Most of the jutsus that Naruto knew that were above D rank were defensive jutsus like Earth Style, Mud Overturn. From what Chusa could see, Naruto's jutsus were centered on the premise of using ninjutsu, so that the enemy could be set up to be taken out with a taijutsu or kenjutsu strike. Considering the rather limited information that Chusa had on the Rinnegan, Chusa figured that Naruto's style made a lot of sense. Thinking about the ease that Naruto had with the Shadow Clone Jutsu, and the fact that the Uzumaki family had brought it to Konoha, Chusa made the decision to ask the Hokage later if a copy of the Shadow Clone Shuriken Jutsu could be given to the cheerful blonde. Rei's ninjutsu style was careful and efficient, Chusa mused. Although Rei had very large chakra reserves for a kunoichi her age, she still only had about 70% of the reserves that Iori had. As for comparing her reserves to Naruto, that just wouldn't be fair. Chusa didn't know many jonin who had reserves that could compete with the boy. Thus, to make up for this deficiency that Rei had compared to her teammates, she had developed superb chakra control. For attacks, Rei had 2 ninjutsus that she liked to use. The first was Spirit Release, Hand of Harmony. This attack involved Rei shooting out a chakra string from each of her fingers and thumb on one hand. The chakra strings would attach to an opponent's tenketsu, at which point Rei could proceed to use her chakra to destroy an opponent's chakra system. Sure, a person would eventually regrow their chakra system, but it would be a painful experience. Rei's second favorite attack was Spirit Release, Penitence Palm. That technique was a quick jab with one of Rei's hands covered in spirit chakra. She used that technique to attack a person's chakra reserves. According to Rei herself, the attack could only be stopped if someone stopped the blow or was able to overwhelm the attack with a massive amount of chakra. After 3 straight hours of ninjutsu practice, Rei, Iori, and even Naruto to an extent were exhausted. Lying down on the training field, the 3 of them were all hoping that Chusa would let them go home and rest. Sure, Chusa had been a wonderful sensei so far and all the points he had brought up were very good ones, but they had been training for 7 hours today. Walking up to his genin students, Chusa said in his usual voice, "Good job, you gentlemen and lady. So far today you've proven that you deserve every bit of praise that the Lord Hokage said to me yesterday. Before I let you go today, there is one more thing that needs to be done." Rei, Naruto, and Iori immediately sat up and were paying a great deal of attention to Chusa. After all, it wasn't every day that you hear that the Hokage himself was giving out praise for you to your instructor. Besides, Chusa had said that after they did whatever it was he had planned, they would be free to go. To their surprise and confusion, Chusa brought out a large mat and set in on the ground. Next, Chusa brought out a large stereo and placed it off to the side. Finally, Chusa turned to his confused students and said, "For the next hour, we shall start on your dance lesions." In complete unison, Rei, Naruto, and Iori let out a loud what that was heard throughout Konoha. With a slightly stern face, Chusa said, "You 3 may not see it right now, but dancing will be a big help to you 3. The various complex dance routines will help you 3 get used to working with each other and moving as one. Once you 3 get good enough at this, you will start incorporating the use of some of your weaker jutsus to help you get your time and to further refine your teamwork. Besides these benefits to your teamwork, dancing will give you several skills that will help in a multitude of ways. For instance, should you three be called to do an infiltration mission, you three could pose as a troupe of dancers. Such a disguise is useful as entertainers often are in places where they can observe defenses or who the enemy is in contact with. It was obvious to Chusa that, although they were accepting his reasons for this move, that Rei, Naruto, and Iori didn't want to start on their dance lessons. Personally, Chusa didn't blame them because he and the rest of the Inoshikacho trio had been utterly confused when their sensei had brought this same thing up. Remembering the trick that his own Jonin sensei had used at first to get the dance lessons going before Chusa and his teammates had come to accept the benefits of their dance lesion, Chusa decided to use it on his own genin students. Pulling out a microphone from behind his back, Chusa said, "Here's the deal. You three shall dance or I shall sing. Trust me, you don't want to hear me sing. In fact, I've been banned from ever performing at a karaoke bar." Chusa had to hold back a chuckle as Rei, Iori, and Naruto quickly scrambled over to the dancing mat that he had laid out earlier. Once the three of them were on the mat, Chusa showed them the dance steps that they would be working on in this session. The dance itself was a relatively simple one, but it did require the three of them to get their timing right or they would smack into each other. After the three genin had had a chance to look at the dance steps, Chusa took the diagram away and hit the play button on the stereo. For the next 2 hours, Chusa had to watch as his three students proceeded to butcher the dance that he had given them. It was painful and hilarious at the same time to Chusa to watch the three try and dance. Painful because Chusa had become an expert on dances and the expert in him was writhing in agony over the three's horrible performance. The hilariousness of the situation came from Chusa remembering back to his first day of training, when he and the rest of the Inoshikacho trio had proceeded to demolish the dance mat. Once the 2 hours were up, Chusa told his students that they had made noticeable improvements, which they really had, and told them that Team Chusa would be following this training pattern for the whole week and any day that they didn't take a mission. Team Chusa was currently walking into Mission's office of the Hokage Tower. It had been almost a month since Chusa had started letting the team go on missions and he was quite impressed with his three students. Their teamwork had improved tremendously along with them improving on their individual skills. All of them still had a lot to learn and the three of them knew. Personally, Chusa estimated that each of his team members could go against an average Chunin having better than even odds of whining. From what Chusa and seen and heard around Konoha, Rei, Iori, and Naruto had the best teamwork of their entire year. This little piece of news gave Chusa a smug grin, as he had heard many Jonin complaining about their team's lack of teamwork compared to what those Jonin had been expecting at this point in their training. Focusing back to the matter at hand, Chusa turned to the Chunin sitting down at the desk and said, "Team Chusa reporting for mission assignment. As Jonin Sensei of Team Chusa, I am officially requesting a C-rank mission for my team." Iori, Rei, and Naruto all raised an eyebrow when they heard Chusa make the request. While they might have been immensely displeased at having to do the D-ranked missions, none of them had suspected that Chusa would actually request a C-rank mission yet. Naruto had actually invited Rei and Iori over to his house for dinner a while back and the three of them talked about the missions. Considering what they had been told of the pecking order for missions, they figured that they shouldn't even bother to ask Chusa for a C-rank mission for at least another month or two. They figured that they could handle a C rank, but that they wouldn't have a chance for one until the time they had agreed upon. Looking up at Chusa, the Chunin behind the desk said in a typical bureaucratic paper pusher voice, "Hold on a moment. You're the first genin team from this year's batch to make an official request for a C-rank mission." Team Chusa then watched as the Chunin behind the desk ducked under the desk and from the sounds of things was rummaging about looking from something. Putting a vanilla folder on the table, the Chunin said, "So sorry about this, but regulations to require me to check your team portfolio before I can hand you the mission. This is due to the fact that your team has been together for less than 6 weeks. It's an insurance thing really. Make sure that Jonin senseis can't bring unready genin out into the field for whatever the reason." Flipping open the folder in front of him, the Chunin at the desk started looking at the contents of the folder and making quiet affirmative sounds. Closing the folder and putting it away, the Chunin said, "Everything seems to check out, so it looks like I can give you a C-rank mission." Picking up a clipboard, the unknown Chunin said, "All right then, here is a mission for you, Team Chusa. I've got one of the major partners in a medium-sized trading company out in the customer's lounge. Apparently this man has a son in Hosen, a medium-sized town about 2 miles from the Tea Country/Fire Country border on the Fire Countryside, who's getting married in 3 weeks. Your would-be employer wants to have a simple family heirloom delivered to his son in time for the wedding. Full details on this mission are available should you choose to accept the mission. What is your decision, Team Chusa?" Chusa looked over towards his students in order to see what they thought of the mission before he made the call whether to accept it or not. Rei had a reserved smile on her face along with a gleam in her eye that showed that she wanted to take the mission. Naruto's face was practically a lighthouse with the smile that he was giving off. As for Iori, that boy had a smug grin on his face and a look in his eyes that said get the mission or else. It was pretty obvious to Chusa that there would be no complaints from his team about taking this mission. With a slight nod of his head, Chusa said, "As leader of Team Chusa, I accept this mission for my team." The Chunin behind the desk nodded his head and handed Chusa a small piece of paper. Once the piece of paper was in Chusa's hands, the Chunin directed the team to head down to the customer's lounge and that their employer's name was on the paper. Less than 5 minutes later, Team Chusa was at the customer's lounge. There were several different people sitting in the lounge and all of them turned their heads to look at Team Chusa. With a clear but not too loud voice, Chusa called out, "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, but would Waka Tsuji please come forward? We are the ninja team that has been assigned your mission request." From one of the further back seats, a slightly chubby man with graying hair and a short gray goatee came forward. The man's clothes were refined, but not extravagant, showing that he was a man of some wealth who was rather modest about it. Bowing with his hands clasped together, the man said, "I am Waka Tsuji, and it is a pleasure to do business with you." Taking a quick glance at Rei, Naruto, and Iori, Waka raised an eyebrow and said, "You would take ones as young as these to do this mission? I know that this is only a simple delivery mission, but considering the distance that must be traveled, will these younglings be able to handle the danger? Neither I nor my son would want the death's young ones such as these to be on our conscience because of an unlikely attack by bandits." Glancing down at his side, Chusa looked to see how his students were reacting. Rei was handling Waka's comments the best and just had a blank look on her face. Naruto just had a slight frown and a slightly annoyed look on his face. Iori was showing the most visible annoyance at Waka's comments and seemed to be ready to hit something. What made the situation so hilarious was the fact that they were standing in a row of Rei, Naruto, and then finally Iori. After capturing that image in his mind, Chusa said, "Do not worry, Mr. Tsuji, about my students. Every single genin that is on a Konoha ninja team has been trained to be able to defeat several bandits by themselves. When they're in a team, there is almost nothing short of another ninja that can stop a well-trained group of genin." Waka bowed his head and said in a humble voice, "My apologies, young ones. I did not mean to disrespect you three with my earlier comments. It was only out of concern for you three that I questioned the choice of you as the ninja that are in my employment for this task." All three genin relaxed when they heard Waka's apology and the reason for his remarks. Naruto made a small remark about how a person shouldn't judge others by their age, causing Waka to smile. With that smile still on his face, Waka said, "Very true, young one. Now the family heirloom that I want delivered to my son is this pendant." At this, Waka took off a small bronze pendant that was hanging around his neck. Rei slowly walked over and gently grabbed the pendant with her hand. Bringing the pendant closer to her, Rei could see that the pendant was octagonal in shape and had the kanji for rabbit inscribed on it in pewter. Putting the pendant in her hip pocket, Rei turned to pay attention to what Waka was saying. "Now then, my son Son is currently staying in Hosen like I said in the mission form. When you get to Hosen, the best place to look for my son is at the 12 Sign Spice and Tea office building and warehouse facility. He is currently the main overseer for that office. As I have said, my son's wedding is in 3 weeks and I want that heirloom given to my son before or at the very latest at his wedding. I would personally go to see his wedding myself, but my wife has become very ill lately and I can't in good conscience leave her unattended for so long as it would take me." Naruto stepped forward and said, "Don't you worry, Mr. Tsuji. We will have this heirloom delivered to your son by the time you specified. That's a promise, Mr. Tsuji, and I, along with my teammates, don't break promises. And if by chance my word alone isn't good enough for you, remember this. It would look really bad on our records if we failed this mission." This last comment of Naruto's combined with his friendly smile caused Waka to burst out into a hearty laugh. It wasn't often in his business dealings with people in general and ninjas in particular that Waka met friendly, competent people that he could respect. Naruto, whether he knew it or not, had made it to the list in Waka's mind. About an hour before sunset, Team Chusa approached a small clearing off some ways from the main road. Chusa took a quick look around the meadow and said, "All right, team, this is where we're camping for tonight. I want each of you three to do your jobs just like we trained and I'll take care of my tent by myself." Instantly, Naruto and his teammates jumped to take care of the task that they were assigned. While other jonin would have preferred to make the trip from Konoha to Hosen in 3 days and to stop at a convenient town at each night, Chusa was taking a different approach. The way Chusa figured it, this was the perfect time for his students to train in putting up a camp in the field while being reasonably safe. Watching their swift and methodical actions, Chuza couldn't be more proud of them. Naruto was quickly and almost silently putting up the team's tents. Iori was setting up a small campfire and was also camouflaging the tents after Naruto put one up. Finally, Rei was carefully setting up traps around the edge of meadow that they were camping in. Seeing the three of them work on their assigned tasks, Chuza just sat back and waited for them to finish their tasks. Once the camp was set up, Iori, who had been assigned as the cook, started to make a stew. Everyone on the team was sitting back around the fire and softly chatting with one another as the stew slowly cooked. Mostly the conversation was about things that each one of them had read in a book or the newspaper before they had shown up at the start of the day. Occasionally the conversation turned to suggestions that they all could do to help improve their training once the mission was completed. Once the stew was done, about an hour into the conversation, everyone handed a bowl over to Iori, who promptly filled it with stew. Because the stew was somewhere between instant mac and cheese and MREs in flavor, no one was talking much as they ate. As the most of the stars started to come out, Chuza put his empty bowl down and said, "All right team, here's the plan. We're gonna go in 3-hour shifts starting right now. It's currently 8 o'clock and Naruto has first watch. At 11 o'clock Naruto is to turn the watch over to Rei. Rei will then hand the watch over to Iori at 2 and I'll finish up the last watch starting at 5. I'll get you all up at 8 o'clock and we will be ready to leave once again promptly at 9. Is that understood, everyone?" All of Chuza's students immediately nodded their heads to show that they understood what Chuza was saying. Everyone but Naruto then started to walk off to their tents so they could get ready to sleep. Still sitting down on his log from before, Naruto activated the Rinnegan and started to use it to help his keep watch. Naruto did this by constantly keeping his point of view in a circular motion around the camp looking outwards. Usually it wouldn't be advised for a person with a Dojutsu to use their Dojutsu while they were keeping watch. This is because of the fact that a Dojutsu has a small constant drain on a person's chakra reserves. However, due to the fact that the Uzumaki had such large chakra reserves, Naruto didn't have to really worry about the drain. Besides, Naruto figured that this would be a great time to continue to train the Rinnegan. Naruto was paying so much attention to observing the surroundings of his camp that he didn't notice Rei coming up next to him. Rei noticed as she approached Naruto that he had the Rinnegan active. For a few seconds Rei just stood where she was and looked at Naruto's eyes. She had personally seen both the Sharingan and the Byakugan before, and Rei had to admit that she preferred the Rinnegan over them. It wasn't because of the powers that each Dojutsu had that had caused Rei to favor the Rinnegan. It was the feel that the eyes gave off. The Byakugan seemed to give off a feeling of coldness whenever Rei saw those white eyes. As for the Sharingan, back before the Uchiha clan had been killed off, Rei could only remember those eyes as ones that radiated a sense of danger. Unlike the coldness of the Byakugan or the whispers of danger that the Sharingan had, the Rinnegan seemed to emit an aura that could best be described as protective and nurturing. That feeling that she felt whenever Rei looked at Naruto's active Rinnegan was pleasant and something that she enjoyed. Sitting down across from Naruto, Rei spent about half an hour just looking at Naruto's eyes. It wasn't hard for Rei to figure out that Naruto was currently observing things outside of the camp. The blank look in his face as she looked at him was more than enough of a clue for her. Shaking her head, Rei mentality scolded herself for letting herself be distracted. She had come out here early so that she could talk to Naruto, and here she was just wasting time. Taking a slight breath, Rei said in her soft, reserved voice, "Naruto, can we talk for a moment?" For a second it looked like Naruto hadn't heard Rei, and then he shook his head and closed his eyes. Opening his eyes again, Naruto looked at Rei with his regular blue eyes. "Sorry for losing track of time, Rei. Is it 11 o'clock already?" Naruto said in his usual friendly voice, although it was sprinkled with a bit of embarrassment. Inside his head, Naruto was scolding himself for not paying attention to his immediate surroundings while he was using the remote viewing abilities of the Rinnegan. A small smile came on Rei's face as she looked at Naruto and his rather sheepish-looking face. "No, Naruto," Rei began to say. "It's not 11 o'clock right now. I came out here early because I wanted to talk to you." Naruto tilted his head, wanting to know what Rei wanted to talk to him about that she apparently didn't want to talk about at dinner. Rei took a deep breath and, while looking straight into Naruto's eyes, said in a calm and serious tone, "Your seal, the one that you mentioned to me, is keeping a demon lock away inside of you, isn't it? That's why you're so secretive about the seal and why you're so worried about it being accidentally weakened. Considering your age and the recent history involving demons and Konoha, you have the QB sealed within you, right?" As soon as the words had left her mouth, Rei knew that she had been correct in her hypothesis. Naruto's usually friendly attitude and posture had completely disappeared as soon as those words had left her mouth. Instead, Naruto was currently stiff as a board and seemed extremely nervous and afraid. Mentally, Rei was kicking herself for being so direct and upsetting Naruto. The Higurashi family archives did after all state that Jinchuriki, both those of the 9 major demons and those of lesser demons, tended to be notoriously skittish and secretive about their status. Not that Rei could really blame them, as she had read about what a lot of Jinchuriki were treated like by ignorant people. Putting on a small smile to show that she didn't hate Naruto for being a Jinchuriki, Rei said softly in a concerned voice, "It doesn't bother me, Naruto, that you have a demon sealed within you. This may be hard for you to accept given what your life has probably been like because of this fact, but I'm not afraid of it. Listen to my voice, Naruto, and listen well. I am not disgusted by that fact about you, and I am also not in the least bit upset that you tried to keep this fact hidden. As your teammate and as your friend, I'm with you, and I am here for you whenever you need a friend." Naruto turned to look at Rei and was completely confused at what she was saying. This was something that Naruto had never expected to deal with. Although several older people, particularly Sarutobi, Iruka, and recently Chusa, had shown Naruto that they accepted the fact he was kept the Kyuubi locked away and wasn't the Kyuubi itself, Naruto hadn't expected to find acceptance of this fact among his peers. While younger generations like Konohamaru's might come to accept him and the fact that he was a Jinchuriki, Naruto had pretty much lumped his own generation in with the adults. Besides, Naruto figured that most of those his age who would be able to accept the fact that he was a Jinchuriki wouldn't want to speak to him again because of the fact that he had hid that aspect of himself. Looking into Rei's emerald eyes, Naruto didn't see a trace of disgust or anger. Instead, all Naruto saw was concern and even a hint of caring in Rei's eyes. This fact made no sense to Naruto, and he just couldn't wrap his mind around the concept that a person could so easily accept that fact about him. Naruto was completely baffled, as he had honestly expected that Rei, or anyone else his age for that matter, to either want nothing to with him or to not want to speak with him for a long time after finding out about his secret. With a clueless look on his face, Naruto said, "Why? Why aren't you upset or scared?" Rei folded her hands in her lap and took a deep breath. Letting out that breath, Rei said, "Naruto, it's not very well known, but the Higurashi family is very old. When I say old, I do mean old. The Higurashi family was founded over 500 years ago. Actually, the Higurashi family is older than that, but that is the farthest back that we currently have accurate records of. As you can see, my family has records of times long before the birth of the modern ninjas. Mostly the Higurashi family has been shrine keepers, which is why we've stayed out of sight, and most people don't realize how old the Higurashi family is." Seeing the look of surprise and shock on Naruto's face when she mentioned the age of the Higurashi family, Rei could only smile. The look on Naruto's face told Rei that, at least for the moment, Naruto had forgotten about what had started this conversation. Wanting to keep the conversation moving, Rei said, "The Higurashi family has had many encounters with Jinchuriki over its long history. My family has always held the belief that those people who are Jinchuriki are to be respected for the burden that they bear. Several of my ancestors developed sealing and other techniques that are designed to help a Jinchuriki handle and contain the demon that they hold. These techniques are viewed as a private matter in my family, which why almost no one has heard about them before. If you want, Naruto, I could look through my family's seal library when we get back to Konoha to try and find some of those techniques for you." Sitting where he was and listening to Rei talk to him about her family gave Naruto a feeling that he wasn't sure how to describe. At best, Naruto could describe his unknown feeling as relief and hope. While Naruto knew intellectually that he wasn't the only Jinchuriki to have existed, it hadn't been until that moment when Rei talked about trying to help him that Naruto was able to make an emotional attachment to the idea. He really wasn't the only person to ever have to deal with this kind of a life. More to the point, there were people out there that respected him and had apparently tried to help other Jinchuriki like him. A small tear slowly traveled down Naruto's cheek and quietly fell off his chin and into the fire. Rei noticed the tear and decided that Naruto would need some time by himself. With a polite cough, Rei gained Naruto's attention, and then she said, "Look, Naruto, we have about 20 minutes until the watch change is supposed to start. Why don't you hit the sack and I take over? After all, there's no point in me trying to get some shut-eye now, and you look like you need time to think about a few things." While Rei had spoken in her usual soft and reserved voice, the look in her eye told Naruto that this was a command and not a suggestion. Nodding his head, Naruto got up and headed for his tent with a cheerful smile on his face after he told Rei good night. Hosen was a small to medium-sized town in Fire Country that had been the result of 3 different country paths joining the main Crescent Peninsula Highway in the same location. Not that Hosen was by any means unimportant. It was, after all, the first stop that anyone from Tea Country could find a place to rest after leaving Tea Country. Life in this small town focused almost entirely on the market where merchants from both Tea and Fire Country would meet and sell their wares to each other. Also in the market was a rather large selection of farmers from the neighboring areas who had come to sell their produce for goods that they couldn't get in their little farm villages. Team Chusa had arrived in Hosen during the off day of the market. When Naruto had asked a local citizen why the market was completely empty, he was told that the market, except for a few grocery stores, was only open every other day. Although Naruto was confused about why that was so, he figured that it would make it easier for him and his team to locate Sonsuji. Turning to the same citizen that he had talked to earlier, Naruto asked where the 12-sign spice and tea office building was located at. Naruto's inquiry was quickly answered by a friendly smile and some quick directions. Turning to his team, Naruto relayed the information that he had been given. As the team was heading off towards the indicated location, Chusa took the time to go over how Naruto had gotten the information. While what Naruto had done was fine for a simple mission like this in the location that they were in, there were certain things that three of them needed to be aware of when gathering information among civilians in foreign countries. All three of Chusa's students were listening to him in rapt attention as he explained his points clearly and simply. Body stance, word choices, or even the gaze of a person's eye, Chusa went on, could show the difference between a regular civilian looking for help and an enemy ninja trying to gain information. Chusa stopped his impromptu lecture when they reached the 12-sign spice and tea office building. Overall, the building was simple in design, speaking of function over form. It was neatly kept and had a fresh coat of paint on it, showing that the people who owned the building took pride in its simple appearance. Opening the door in front of them, Team Chusa was greeted by a friendly secretary who smiled and politely said, "I'm sorry, but this building isn't for customers. If you are looking to buy something from us, please go to one of our stalls in the market tomorrow when the market opens." Iori, who had been given the go-ahead to speak for the group earlier by Chusa, gave the secretary a grunt and said, "We're not customers, miss, and we aren't interested in buying any of your goods. We're ninja from Konoha on a small mission to deliver a personal item from a Mr. Wakasuji to his son Sonsuji, who we are told works at this office. Could you please just get Mr. Suji down from wherever he is so that we can complete our mission?" The secretary's face frowned as she heard Iori's request. Folding her hands together on her desk, the secretary looked down at her hands and said, "I wish I could do that for you, sir. Unfortunately, Mr. Suji has disappeared as of 2 days ago. The only people that I know who might know where Mr. Suji's whereabouts are his fiancée Kasumi and Kasumi's father, Mr. Tadu." Looking up at Team Chusa, the secretary revealed her scared eyes and she quietly said, "Can you please find Mr. Suji? Everyone here at the office is worried sick about his disappearance." Chusa gave the secretary his condolences and then proceeded to direct his team out of the office building. On his way out, Chusa heard Iori grumble under his breath, "So much for an easy mission." Although part of him was thinking of scolding the boy for assuming that a mission would be as simple as Iori had apparently thought it was, Chusa didn't. After all, Chusa himself had been thinking the same thing for most of the mission as well, and he therefore had no room to berate his own student for doing the same. Touring to face his students, Chusa immediately directed them to start trying and find out where Kasumi or her father might be at so that they could continue their mission. It took Team Chusa about half an hour, but eventually they were able to find out the address of the Tadu household. Going up to the door of the rather small and simple house that they had been directed towards, Ray firmly knocked on the door. The door opened up to reveal a brunette with long hair wearing an apron standing on the other side. "Yes." The young woman who had answered the door started to say, "My name is Kasumi Tadu. Is there anything that I can help you with?" Ray gave a small elegant smile and said, "Yes, Miss Tadu, there is something that you can help us with. You see, we were hired by Mr. Wakasuji, the father of the same Sonsuji that I have been told you are going to marry in a month, to deliver something to his son. We've just come over from the place that Mr. Sonsuji works at, and they've told us that Mr. Suji hasn't shown up in 2 days. The secretary over there directed us over to you in order to help find out where we might find Mr. Suji." A slightly relieved look crossed Kasumi's face before she said, "Please come in. We can talk in the living room over some hot tea." Kasumi then stepped back from the door and let the 4 Konoha ninjas into her house. During their short walk to the living room, Naruto noticed several signs that pointed to the Tadus having more money than their small house would seem to indicate. After her guests had sat down in the living room, Kasumi left briefly to go and get the tea she had promised. Like a pleasant hostess, Kasumi asked each of the ninjas what type of tea they wanted and then started to prepare it for them. Once the tea was set out in front of all of them, Kasumi took a deep breath and started to speak. I must admit that I am a bit surprised that you four have shown up, but I guess I shouldn't really be surprised. Everything has been happening so fast these past 2 days that I honestly have trouble comprehending it myself. At that moment Kasumi started to cry and pulled out a handkerchief to wipe the tears away. Naruto, Chusa, and the rest of the team just sat where they were in surprise and worry as they watched Kasumi cry. After a few minutes of her crying, the tears started to slow down. Shaking her head, Kasumi stopped crying for a second and said, "Sorry about that, it's just that these are some troubling times for me. Not many people know it because it happened only yesterday, but Son, my fiancé, W, was kidnapped last night." All the members of Team Chusa were sitting where they were in puzzlement and shock. Why on earth was Son Suji kidnapped? After all, the man probably wasn't that rich given the fact that the office in town was one of the smaller offices compared to other shipping companies in town. It didn't even make sense to hold the man for ransom from his father, as the 12-sign spice and tea company altogether wasn't even worth 10 million Rio, and Waka Suji was one of 12 major stockholders. Wanting to get more information, Rei politely put her teacup down on the table and said, "Miss Tadu, was your fiancé in a position of political power in Hosen?" Kasumi just looked at Rei and shook her head. Rei closed her eyes for a second and then said, "Miss Tadu, can you give us some more information about your fiancé? No offense, but Mr. Suji doesn't seem like someone worth kidnapping to a criminal." Kasumi had a sad smile on her face as she refilled her tea and said, "I am not offended in the least by your questions, Ms. Ninja Dash." At that point Iori interrupted Kasumi to give Kasumi the names of Team Chusa, and Kasumi corrected herself, "Miss Higurashi. The fact of the matter is I never even dreamed that such a thing as this could happen to my Son. My fiancé is an upstanding citizen and is well respected by those that know him for his charity work and his honest business practices." Chusa, having figured that his team would want to go after the kidnappers, wanted to know the circumstances surrounding the kidnapping. If the kidnappers were your run-of-the-mill bandits, then Chusa was perfectly willing to let his students proceed with fulfilling their mission. After all, in the ninja world, one had to learn to deal with unexpected hurdles that would come between a ninja and their mission objective. However, Chusa was not willing to risk his team if the kidnappers turned out to be ninjas, and was planning on contacting Konoha immediately if that was the case. With a very serious expression on his face, Chusa said, "Miss Tadu, any and all information that you might have surrounding your fiancé's kidnapping would be most helpful. I am sure that you've told the police and that this is a trying time for you. But if I and my team are to help the situation, we need to know as much as we can." Kasumi nodded her head, said softly, "I understand, Mr. Akimichi." Taking a deep breath to calm her nerves, Kasumi brought the memories of that dreadful night. With the memories brought back up, Kasumi started to recite what she knew. "It was evening and I was over at Son's house with him, discussing some minor details about our wedding plans that needed to be taken care of at the time. Suddenly there was this violent banging at the front door and Son told me to hide in the closet. From my hiding spot in the closet, I saw through a crack in the door several big men barge into the room. These ruffians then punched Son a few times before one of them pulled out some chains that they tied Son up with. After that, my fiancé's limp body was dragged out the door and I saw several of the ruffians grab the silverware. I couldn't remember the ruffians' faces, but I did notice that 3 of them had a tattoo of a white skull on black flames that was tattooed on their shoulders. I don't know any more than that. I'm sorry." Chusa nodded his head, slightly relieved that it was run-of-the-mill bandits and street trash that had taken Son Suji. At the very least, it would less of a headache for him to deal with once this whole mess got sorted out. The bureaucratic forms that were needed to be filled out when ninjas from friendly but rival villages fought due to mission interest conflicts were a pain in the butt. True, there were also forms that needed to be filled out if a missing ninja was fought, but those were fairly simple to do. Besides, Tea Country and this part of Fire Country were unfavorable areas for a missing ninja to go to when looking for safety or work. With a fatherly smile on his face, Chusa thanked Kasumi for her help and then led his team outside. Once all 4 of them were outside, Chusa said, "As you 3 have most likely figured out, we're going to go after the kidnappers. I know that you 3 want to do this, and since all of our information points to it just being bandits who have done this, I'm going to let you 3 do the rescue. Just remember that if at any time you gain solid information that there is a ninja among these street scums, regardless of the supposed level that the ninja is supposed to be, you will pull back. In such a situation, I will make the call as to whether or not we continue to go on alone or if we call in reinforcements. Now, I would like you 3 to come up with a reasonable plan for us finding out what we need to know about these bandits, and if the plan is good enough, we'll use it." Naruto, Rei, and Iori all firmly nodded their heads once. Chusa had done this several times with D-ranked missions that didn't automatically have a crystal clear plan of action to follow. Unlike other Jonin leaders of Genin teams, Chusa tried to restrict his mission leadership and let his team handle the planning on their own whenever it was practical. This was so that his Genin could think more independently than their classmates could think. In fact, Chusa had yet to forcefully take over a plan once his 3 students got going. While their teacher might help point out some shortcomings in a plan, Naruto, Rei, and Iori tended to be right on the money. Naruto spoke up and said as the team was standing around, "We need to split up and gain more information. Chusa should go ask the police about that gang symbol and what the police have done so far in finding Son Suji. Rei should go check out what the local shrine keeper has to say, as she does have the best connections in that department. I should go to the town archives and use my shadow clones to help locate any news about this group that I can find in a newspaper. Finale, I think Iori should head over to the park and the main square to ask some of the elder folks that tend to flock in those areas. Most people tend to ignore the elders who sit around all day, and those people notice a lot more than most people give them credit for." Rei and Iori both smiled. Well, Rei smiled and Iori grinned, to show that they approved of Naruto's plan. Knowing that it was a great plan, Chusa nodded his head and said, "All right, we follow Naruto's plan. We'll meet in the town square 3 hours from now and tell what we've found out. Once we've swapped information, we will plan our next course of action." The Genin trio nodded their heads to show that they understood before they headed off to their assignments. When everyone met up after their 3-hour search, they agreed to go to a small restaurant to have a late lunch while they compared what they had found out. Naruto, Rei, and Chusa weren't able to find any useful information on the bandits except for the fact that they were called the Fiery Death Gang and that the gang had moved into Hosen only recently. Those 3 were rather down at their lack of success. Even Chusa was down, as he had expected the police to have a good deal of information on the Fiery Death Gang. Everyone noticed that Iori was rather silent, and they all turned to see a roguish smirk on Iori's face. Rei narrowed her eyes slightly and said in a sharp but still somehow reserved manner, "All right, Iori. What is it that you haven't told us yet? Since you haven't spoken yet, it's time for you to tell us what you've found out." Iori grabbed his soda mug from the table and took a big chug. After that, Iori set his mug on the table and started to speak. "I've got what we need," Iori said, glad to see that his news was brightening up his teammates' faces. "One of the gang members lives in his parents' house and talks in his sleep, according to his old man. The Fiery Death Gang members like to meet at a nightclub on the far side of town that's known as a Chico's Corner. They don't own the nightclub, but they always have several people in the club at all times. It's where the Fiery Death Gang likes to do business with potential customers. Also, the Fiery Death Gang has a warehouse somewhere outside of Hosen that they keep their illicit goods at. We find the warehouse, we find Son." Everyone else at the table was nodding their heads, showing that they had been paying attention to what Iori had said. Naruto took a bite out of his beef dish, swallowed, and then said, pointing his chopsticks at Iori, "Great intel, Iori. However, what do we do next? We can't go rescue Son unless we know where the warehouse is that he's supposed to be kept at. I'm assuming that you've got a plan in your head, because you wouldn't mention a Chico's Corner unless you did have a plan." One of Rei's eyebrows rose a bit as she was slightly surprised that Naruto had caught that little connection before she did. With his soda mug in his hand, Iori made a gruff sound and then said, "Correct, Naruto, I do have a plan. This situation practically screams infiltration mission like they described back in the classrooms of the academy. My plan is relatively simple. Naruto and Rei, transformed into young adult versions of themselves, shall pose as a couple and enter the nightclub. Once inside, the 2 of you will ID several Fiery Death Gang members and keep track of their location. An hour after you to go in, I'll enter the club posing as a young adult version of myself. I'll then hit on Rei and she'll pass me the location of easiest gang member to capture. Naruto will soon afterwards arrive and the 2 of us will take it outside, using that as an excuse to leave the club and go capture the targeted gang member. Rei will at the same time leave the club using the cover that she's pissed with her boyfriend acting like a macho fool again, and then Rei will wait outside to cover Naruto and me as we escape with our hostage. Chusa will be the muscle to help bail us out of trouble if the whole operation goes south on us." Chusa looked around the table to see what Naruto and Rei thought of Iori's plan. Both Naruto and Rei were sporting slight blushes, most likely at the thought of having to pose as a couple. Not that Chusa blamed them for it, as Team Chusa was a generalist team with a slight leaning towards tactical situations. Mentally, Chusa made a note to start increasing the team's training for infiltration situations once they got back to Konoha. Taking a deep breath, Chusa said, "This sounds like a good plan. However, if either of you 2, Naruto and Rei, are uncomfortable with this plan, we can try and think of another one." Naruto and Rei turned to face each other and looked into each other's eyes for a minute as if trying to ask the other one what they thought. Then the two of them nodded their heads at the same time. While both of them turned to face the rest of the team, it was Ray who spoke. Naruto and I should be able to pull this off. We'll just need an hour or so to hammer out the details of the plan. You know, how our transformations will look like, the codes that are to be used, any cover story that we might be asked, and those sorts of things. One Ray had said what she needed to say. The team quietly finished their meal and left the restaurant for a quiet place to hammer out the details of the plan like Ray said they needed to do. It was currently 9 o'clock at night and Team Chusa was ready to begin its infiltration mission. Ray was currently transformed into a 20-year-old version of herself that she had based off of her mother and her own looks. Since this was a nightclub they were infiltrating, Ray was dressed for the part. Her illusion's outfit consisted of black boots, hip-hugging red pants, and a white t-shirt that had gone unbuttoned but was tied in a knot below her bust to preserve modesty. Even though it was just an illusion and she was actually wearing her usual ninja clothes, Ray felt exposed and was very embarrassed. If she could have gone with a more modest outfit, Ray would have, but according to the information that Iori had gotten, Ichiko's corner was a slightly trashy place. Turning to her right, Ray took a good look at Naruto's transformation. Like her, Naruto's transformation looked like he was around 20 years old. Naruto's hair was still in the same style, but it was now a shade of dull brown. Less noticeable, Naruto had claimed. For clothing, Naruto had created the illusion that he was wearing a black biker jacket, torn blue jeans, and a red sweatshirt under the jacket. Also, Naruto's transformed older self had 2 earrings in his ear that were contented by a small chain, and Naruto was still sporting his sunglasses. If it wasn't for his punk look, Naruto would have looked like a male art model in Ray's mind. Naruto gave Ray a slight smile and said, "All right, Ray. Ready to get this show on the road?" Ray gave Naruto a small nod to show that she was ready. Knowing that Ray was out of her element, Naruto wrapped his arm around her and said quietly, "Relax, Ray. I know this part of the plan unsettles you, but you need to calm down. Just ignore any gazes that the men in there will give you and you'll be fine. Remember that this is just an illusion you're using to complete your mission. Those people may look, but they won't touch. I promise you." Ray felt herself calming down as she listened to what Naruto had to tell her. His words were able to help Ray get over her disgust at how she looked and reminded her as to what they were doing. Once she was ready, Naruto and Ray set off towards Ichiko's corner. The bouncer, after giving a good 2-second glance at Ray's chest, let the duo in without any real hassle. When they entered the club itself, Ray and Naruto were immediately assaulted by the smells that permeated the club. All of the cigarette smoke, cheap incense, opium, and body sweat that hung in the air made Ray want to vomit. Luckily for Ray, Naruto was there to keep her steady. On his end, Naruto was having a tough time as well dealing with the atmosphere of the club. However, unlike Ray, Naruto had a small skill that he had been taught by Irika for such a situation. Naruto had used his chakra to dull the signals that his nose was sending to his brain. Due to his chakra control, Naruto wasn't able to fully use the technique and was still affected by the smells. Knowing that they wouldn't be able to continue their mission in this condition, Naruto looked around for a private area. Noticing several doors that were under a private entertainment sign at the far side of the room, Naruto led Ray to one of the open doors and then closed and locked the door after they were inside. Turning on the single light in the room, Naruto saw that the room was completely empty except for a single dirty bed in the center of the room. Disengaging his transformation, Naruto turned to look at Ray and said, "Drop the transformation, we shouldn't be bothered for a few minutes at least." Ray was curious as to why Naruto told her to do such a thing, but she complied nonetheless. After her transformation was dropped, Naruto gave Ray a small item. Looking into her eyes, Naruto said, "It's a nose plug. Put it in your nose to block off your sense of smell and then reactivate your transformation." There was a grateful look in Ray's eyes as she complied with Naruto's commands. As Ray put the nose plug in her nose and re-engaged the transformation, she saw that Naruto had done the same things. Once Naruto and Ray had their transformations back in place, they waited in room for 10 minutes. After they felt they had been in the room for a long enough time so that they didn't look suspicious, Ray and Naruto exited the room, leaving the door open. Walking very close to each other, the two of them went onto the dance. Silently, they were both thanking Chusa for his forced dance lessons. Although Chusa never had them dancing in such an intimate way as Naruto and Ray were currently dancing due to the fact that it was how everyone around them was dancing, Naruto and Ray still appreciated the lessons. Looking over each other's shoulders, Naruto and Ray were able to spot and carefully monitor all of the Fiery Death Gang members in the building. By pretending to flirt with each other, Naruto and Ray were able to pass the information that they had gathered to each other. About an hour after Naruto and Ray had first entered Ichiko's corner, Iori made his way into the nightclub. Rei was rather easy for Iori to spot as she was sitting in one of the booths on the edge of the dance floor. Naruto, who had been paying close attention to the clock, had disappeared so that Iori could talk to Rei without ruining the plan. If anyone in the club had been paying attention to Naruto, they would have seen that he was standing in the shadows paying close attention to Rei and Iori. For some strange reason, Naruto felt a slight annoyance as he watched the scene unfold between Rei and Iori. Figuring that the annoyance was over how long this part of the mission had been, Naruto ignored the feeling and paid close attention to Rei. Soon enough, Naruto saw Rei give the signal that the two of them had arranged to tell him that it was time to commence the next stage of the mission. Putting a scowl on his face, Naruto headed over to the table and angrily confronted Iori. After putting on a bit of a show for the people in the club, Naruto and Iori left the club with Rei following behind shortly after them in a huff. The trio headed towards the side exit that contained their target, a lone half-drunk gang member. Since he was closer to the target, Naruto let out a strong punch to the gang member's head. Iori then quickly ran up and grabbed the unconscious gang member while Rei, who was about 20 feet behind the boys, cast a minor genjutsu to hide what Team Chuza was doing. With the gang member in hand, the trio made a quick exit from the nightclub, dropped their transformations, and quickly made their way over to where Chuza was waiting for them. Chuza let out a small sigh of relief when he saw the trio plus their package coming towards them. Once the whole team was together, Chuza said, "Okay, let's head back to the hotel. When we get there, I'll take care of getting the information out of this scum. I want you three to wait in the second room of the hotel, as I don't want you three to have to deal with a full field interrogation just yet." There was a somber expression in Naruto, Iori, and Rei's faces as they nodded their heads. Each one of them was silently thankful that Chuza didn't want them around. It was one thing they had all heard in the academy to kill a man. It was an entirely different thing to inflict pain on a fellow human in such a way that they're still alive. 40 minutes after they had left Ichiko's corner, Naruto, Rei, and Iori were all sitting in the hotel room that Chuza had led them to. Naruto and Rei were both sitting down on the couch, each reading a book. Iori was leaning against the opposite wall from Naruto and Rei drinking a glass of water. From his vantage point, Iori could see that Rei had moved slightly closer to Naruto since those two had sat down. Not that Iori could blame Rei, as she, despite her slightly cold exterior, was a rather empathic young woman. It was obvious to Iori that Rei was having trouble handling the constant moans of pain that they were all hearing coming from the other room. Not that Iori could blame her, as he himself was having some difficulty dealing with the moans himself. The only difference between the two of them, Iori mused, was that he hadn't shown his discomfort at all so far. Rei was having trouble blocking out the sounds of Chuza interrogating their captive, even as she focused on her book. Thanks to her own disposition and her living at the shrine, Rei found it difficult to deal with suffering happening in other people. It wasn't nearly as big of a weakness to Rei as, say, Tsunade's fear of blood, but it was a noticeable trouble for her. Knowing that as Kunoichi she would have to cause people pain and likely even kill a few people, Rei had set about to learn jutsus that were efficient and quick. Thanks to Rei's private training with training posts that were under genjutsus to look like real people, Rei had been able to train herself to be able to handle the idea of killing some. However, the slow, steady agony that was coming out the other room was starting to get to her. At his spot on the couch, Naruto was busy reading a book that Iruka had given him when Iruka had heard that Naruto's team had become an official team. The book was called In the Shade of the Great Tree and was the published memoir of the Shodai Hokage. Naruto was currently reading a section where the Shodai talked about how he coped with the mental hardships that being a ninja entailed. Personally, Naruto found the Shodai's recollections to be rather comforting, especially with what he was hearing going on. Although he didn't show any outward sign of noticing Rei move slightly closer to him, Naruto was well aware of what his teammate was going through. Not wanting to embarrass Rei, Naruto just let her draw what comfort his presence seemed to be giving her, while making a mental note to buy a copy of In the Shade of the Great Tree for Rei when the team got back to Konoha. Suddenly there was a loud scream that emanated from the other room, causing all three genin to jump slightly. After that scream, the trio could hear nothing coming from the room. Turning to look at that door with slight uneasiness, they all watched as Chuza walked through the door with an expressionless face. Chuza turned to his students and said, "I want all three of you to get some sleep. Take half a sleeping pill if you need to in order to get some shut-eye. I'm allowing their use this once. At 1 o'clock we will move on the warehouse, and I don't want any of you half asleep at that time." Naruto, Rei, and Iori just gave a tired yes to Chuza before they set about getting ready to sleep. All three of them were exhausted emotionally and physically after the events of the day. Rei was given the couch by Naruto and Iori, while both boys grabbed a blanket and pillow to find a spot on the floor. As the trio did this, they didn't notice that Chuza was still in the room. There was a sad look in Chuza's eye as he watched his students get ready for bed. Hopefully the Hokage would let him take those three on a small vacation after this mission was over before they returned to Konoha. Chuza was certain that those three would need a vacation and that they deserved a vacation. At 12:50, Chuza promptly but gently woke his students up and made sure that they were wide awake. As Naruto, Rei, and Iori listened to Chuza explain the layout of the criminal warehouse, they were all drinking a heavily caffeinated tea to help them wake up. Once Chuza had finished outlining the plan and the layout of the criminal warehouse, he said in a stern voice, "Look, I will be honest with you three. I don't expect any of you three to be unblooded when the sun rises. In fact, I'm expecting you three to at least have one kill under your belts when this is all over. The first kill is always the hardest for a person to make, and it's easier for a person to handle when the kill is someone evil like a criminal. It's also better for you to deal with now than later in your lives or on a battlefield where I can't protect you if you freeze up. Now let's go rescue Son, and remember that these criminals are most likely going to get the death sentence for their various and many crimes." With that said, Team Chuza left the hotel room and headed off to the location of the criminal warehouse. Once they left Hosen, Team Chuza soon found that they had to travel through a forest. Although the trees were a good deal smaller than the trees around Konoha, the presence of the trees were comforting to the younger members of the team. Soon enough, Team Chuza reached the clearing in the forest that the warehouse was located at. Except for the small wooden watchtower next to it, the warehouse looked like your typical warehouse. Also next to the warehouse, about 100 feet away, was a small building that Team Chuza assumed to be a barracks of some sort for the gang members at the warehouse. Finally, the team noticed the pair of guards by the front door, a single guard on the watchtower, and the final sentry that was walking around the perimeter. Chuza turned to his students and said, "All right, I want Naruto to take out the guards by the door, Rei has the sentry, and finally Iori has the watchtower. Kill your targets and remember to do it silently." Naruto, Rei, and Iori all nodded their heads to show that they understood. Standing at his perch in the tree, Chuza stood and watched as his students went to work. Rei used the tree line to cover her movements and waited until the sentry got close to her new position. Once the sentry was close enough to her, Rei killed the man by thrusting her naginata quickly into the sentry's head, killing the man instantly. Turning to look at the pair of guards by the door, Chuza saw them suddenly both get pulled into the ground, buried completely, and Naruto appearing in their place. Trust a personal student of Iruka's to remember the original purpose of that jutsu, Chuza silently mused. Finally, Chuza turned to look at the watchtower and saw a small dull red light appear. The light blinked several times in Konoha's battle code, and Chuza read Iori's message that he had succeeded in his task. Moving from his perch down to where Naruto was at, Chuza motioned for Rei and Iori to come over. Once all of his students were with him again, Chuza asked, "Are you three okay?" While it was obvious that the three genin were still shocked at what they had just done, they were still ready to continue on with the mission. Giving each of them a small hug, Chuza told them all that everything would be over soon. Naruto, Rei, and Iori's faces all relaxed a bit after Chuza gave them that comforting hug and said those soothing words. That said and done, Chuza forced open the warehouse door and lead his team into the warehouse. The warehouse was poorly lighted and was mostly stacked up with various boxes and crates. To the team's surprise, there weren't any guards in the immediate vicinity of the door they had come through. Obviously, the fiery death leader had thought that the outside guards were enough. Slowly, Team Chuza made their way to the center of the warehouse. As they approached the center of the warehouse, they all noticed that the lighting improved. Also, Team Chuza started to hear the sounds of what sounded like a person punching something. Naruto, Rei, Iori, and even Chuza all stopped dead in their tracks as they heard an angry voice come from behind a very large stack of boxes. "I'm getting tired of these shenanigans, Son. You will tell me where you hid the pendant, and you will tell me now, brother." Naruto, Rei, and Iori all froze when they heard Son's captor refer to Son as brother. Slowly, they all turned as one to look at Chuza, who was standing where he was with a stern look on his face. Before Chuza could say anything in battle sign language, Naruto signaled that he was going to use the Rinnegan to see what they were up against. All the rest of Team Chuza just sat back and waited for Naruto to tell them what he had seen. His plan was, after all, a very sound plan, and besides, it wasn't like Naruto could see them disagree while he was throwing his point of view. Naruto positioned his point of view above where he heard the voice coming from so that he was looking down on the scene. Thanks to his extensive training on throwing his point of view, Naruto wasn't at all disconcerted by how he was looking at things. Instantly Naruto noted that there were only 4 people in the small clearing behind where Hibari was. 2 of the people were your stereotypical goons with the slightly dumb look on their face thrown in for free. Besides Dumb and Dumber, Naruto could see a man tied up in a chair looking like he had been hit a few times. Finally, the last man looked a lot like the person that was tied up, and that last person had a slightly maniacal look in his eyes. After making one final check to see that he didn't miss anyone, Naruto disengaged that part of his bloodline and returned to his original point of view. The rest of the team all got a stormy look in their faces as Naruto passed along what he had seen. Knowing that they didn't have the experience to quickly plan out what they should do, Naruto, Ray, and Iori all turned to Chusa and asked him what they should do. Less than a minute after they asked him what they should do, Chusa gave them the battle plan. Naruto and Iori were to move around and kill the 2 goons. At the same time, Ray was supposed to kill Son's questioner. Noticing the slight shock in the trio's eyes that they weren't supposed to try and incapacitate, Chusa pointed to one of the many crates behind where he was. Chusa then explained that the drugs that were in those crates all carried the immediate death penalty for trafficking in them. Naruto, Ray, and Iori all slowly nodded their heads in unison to show that they understood what Chusa was trying to tell them. Sparing these criminals would be pointless because they would just be put to death anyway. Once he had looked into each of his students' eyes to make sure that they were still up to what they had to do, Chusa motioned for the plan to start. As they took off, Iori headed to the right while Naruto and Ray started to circle around their targets from the left. When Naruto stopped traveling with Ray due to the fact that he had reached his target, he continued to pay attention to Ray. Team Chusa had during their training sessions planned for such an attack like this, and the plan stated that the other teammates would wait for the one who had the furthest to travel to give the attack signal. When Ray got to the closest point to her target while still being in the shadows, she brushed her thumb against her bracelet, summoning her Naginata into her hand. Ray then glanced and saw that Naruto and Iori were both ready with their blades in their hands. Knowing that both boys' eyes were on her, Ray gave the signal to attack before she rushed at her target. Rushing at her target, Ray quickly jabbed her Naginata up and into the interrogator's heart. Unlike most Naginatas, Ray's Naginata had been modified slightly so that the end of its curved blade had a small jabbing point. This small point was what allowed Ray to use her Naginata like she had just done. Tied up in his chair, Son Suji couldn't believe what he had just seen. Son's brother, who had been pulling back his fist to punch Son again, was suddenly skewered by a blade from behind. Quickly looking to his right and his left, Son saw the big guards that his brother had watching over him suddenly meet a similar fate. As the bodies of his brother and his brother's goons fell to the ground, Son could see 3 young teens standing behind the falling bodies. The blonde-haired teen to Son's right looked at Son and said in a friendly voice, "We're a Konoha ninja team and we're here to help you, Son Suji." Before Son could reply to the blonde's comment, Son felt his bindings being cut. Turning around slightly, Son saw a very large man step around from behind the chair. This big man then said in a calm voice, "All right, Naruto, Ray, I want you 2 to get Son out of here. Iori, once everyone else has left the building, I want you to torch the warehouse. I'm gonna go and destroy that barracks we saw earlier. With a bit of luck tonight, we'll destroy the Fiery Death Gang completely. After this is all over, we'll all meet back at the To-Do household. Miss To-Do, after all, should be one of the first to know that her fiancé is safe." In the morning, Kasumi had insisted that Team Chusa stay at her place for the night after they brought Son back. Team Chusa, Son, and Kasumi were all sitting around getting ready to talk. Son held the small pendant that Ray had given him when they all got up, and he said somberly, "So much trouble for something so small." With a sad look in his eye, Son continued on talking. "This pendant has been in my family for 4 generations. It was given to my great-grandfather by a wandering monk as a token of thanks for my great-grandfather sharing his dinner with the monk. Ever since then, this pendant has been passed down in my family whenever the family heir is about to be wed." Looking at Team Chusa, and in particular the trio, Son gave a small smile. "I'm sure that you are all wondering why I was kidnapped by my brother over this little thing. Don't look bashful, I can tell that you 3 young ones want to know. You all, I think, deserve to know what went on, and I think that talking about it will help me deal with this whole fiasco." Naruto, Ray, and Iori all looked slightly embarrassed that Son saw their curiosity, but they were all glad that he didn't complain. Chusa, who was sipping some tea, was also glad to hear about why this whole mess got started in the first place. Closing his eyes, Son was quiet for a moment as if he was collecting his thoughts before he softly spoke. "My elder brother Kaworu was born during the height of the depression that occurred between the Second and Third Great Ninja Wars 7 years before I was born. Although the Suji family fortunes had gotten a lot better by the time I was born, Those times of poverty made a big impact on my brother. Kaworu always seemed to desire to make more money. Wealth just seemed to be an obsession with my brother. By the time I was in my teens, Kaworu apparently lost his morals when it came to making money. I remember coming home one day from school when I was 15 to find out that my father had thrown Kaworu out of the family. At first I was shocked that my father would do such a thing, but then I found out that Kaworu had been making deals with the local criminal groups. For 10 years until this week, I did not know the whereabouts of my brother. Son paused for a moment to take a sip of his tea before he continued his tale. I'm sure all of you are wondering in the back of your minds, what does Kaworu's history have to do with the pendant? My brother's interest in the rabbit pendant had nothing to do with some mental victory against our father, if that is the conclusion that you've drawn in your heads. You see, Kaworu's motivation for capturing me and trying to obtain the pendant was driven by the only thing he craved: money. During my captivity, I overheard my guard speak about how Kaworu had gained a manuscript that talked about a great stockpile of gold that was hidden away. From what I can piece together from what I overheard, Kaworu's manuscript apparently said that a wandering monk was given the key to the stockpile and that this key was supposed to be a small item. Kaworu must have assumed that the monk my great-grandfather helped and the monk described in the manuscript were the same monk. Therefore, Kaworu believed that the rabbit pendant was the key to the stockpile, and so he came after me to get the pendant. Team Chusa could barely keep their shock and disgust for Kaworu's actions from being too noticeable on their faces. For Naruto, his disgust originated with Kaworu's obsession. It's one thing to have a goal in life, and it's another thing to be consumed by the goal. Rei and Chusa, who both came from loving families, had trouble accepting that a person could do such a thing to family. The thing that got Iori the most was the fact that Kaworu was willing to give up his morals to try and achieve his goals. Personally, Iori could sympathize with having a great ambition, but if sell your soul to get there, what is the point of trying? Son apparently noticed Team Chusa's disgust, and he said, "Please don't hold my brother's actions towards me against him. He wasn't all there in the head. All I feel for my brother's passing is pity that he turned out the way he did. Back when I was a little boy, Kaworu was actually a decent brother, before he became too obsessed with money. I can only hope that he turns out better in the next life than he did in this lifetime." The room was silent for the next few minutes before anyone was willing to start talking again. After a few minutes of small talk, Team Chusa quietly left the to-do household, saying that they needed to head back to Konoha now that the mission was accomplished. Kasumi and Son were standing by the door and politely waving the team goodbye as Team Chusa left the to-do household. As the sun started to sink towards the horizon, Team Chusa, who had been traveling at a more relaxed pace at Chusa's insistence, pulled into a small town about 8 kilometers from Otafukugai. While the team could push ahead towards Konoha, which was only 20 km away to the northwest, Chusa had stated that they were stopping in this town for the night. When Naruto asked why they weren't pushing ahead, Chusa told Naruto that the gate guards are a lot friendlier during the day than in the middle of the night. What Chusa didn't tell his students was that he was trying to let them have a breather space to fully get used to what had happened on the mission. Currently, Team Chusa had split up into 3 groups. Chusa himself was busy checking the team into the town inn for the night. Iori was currently strolling around town taking a look at the various restaurants that were available because he had won the right, in a rock-paper-scissors game, to pick where the team was going to eat for the night. Naruto and Rei were currently sitting next to a small stream that ran just outside of the inn that Chusa was checking the team into. As Naruto and Rei waited for Chusa to finish checking in and for Iori to come back, they talked to each other to pass the time. Their conversation didn't touch on their last mission at all due to the fact they were both still a little sensitive about it. Instead, Rei and Naruto talked about various training strategies that they each liked to do back in Konoha. Suddenly, Naruto and Rei heard someone behind them start to chuckle and say, well, starting to charm the girls a little young, aren't you, Naruto?" Rei and Naruto, both sporting the tiniest hints of blushes on their cheeks, turned around to see a white-haired man with red lines coming down from his eyes looking at them. The unknown man shifted his gaze over to Rei for a second and then smirked. "Well, Naruto, if you're going to start early, at least you're on the right track flirting with a beauty like this girl." Naruto moved so that he was slightly in front of Rei, and he also moved his hands so that they could quickly grab his kodachis if this unknown man started to cause trouble. In the back of his mind, Naruto was wondering how on earth this person could know his name. After all, most of Konoha tried its best to ignore the fact that he existed, and except for this latest mission, Naruto had never left Konoha's walls. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto said with a light edge in his voice, "Who are you and how do you know my name?" The man then let out a good laugh and said while doing a strange dance, "Who am I? Boy, I am the holy sage of Myuboka Mountain, a man beloved in the north, east, west, and south. I am Jiraiya of the Sannin. At this point Jiraiya ended his crazy dance and noticed the confused and slightly disbelieving looks that Naruto and Rei were sending towards him. In the back of his mind Jiraiya was grumbling at how Naruto and Rei were reacting to his introductions. What is it with kids today? No respect. Oh well, at least the boy seems to be growing up all right. Wasn't expecting to meet up with the boy for a few more months yet, so is it too soon to start helping the boy? While Jiraiya, Naruto, and Rei were standing where they were, Chuza came out of the inn and started heading towards them. As Chuza got closer he spotted Jiraiya, and then said in a slightly humble tone, "Lord Jiraiya, why are you here?" Chuza then noticed Naruto and Rei, particularly the defensive stance that Naruto was in. With a friendly fatherly voice Chuza said, "Don't worry Naruto. Lord Jiraiya is one of Konoha's most trusted ninjas, so stand down." In fact, Lord Jiraiya was the student of the 3rd Lord Hokage and the personal tutor of the 4th Lord Hokage. After seeing Naruto stand down from his ready position and go back to standing next to Rei, Chuza inquired with a questioning voice, "Lord Jiraiya, is there any reason why you're in this small town talking to my students? If so, is there any way that I can be of assistance to you?" Jiraiya just stuck his hands in his pockets, gave a slight shrug, and then said in a nonchalant manner, "I'm just passing through Chuza. Tomorrow I'm going up to Otafukagai for some well-deserved R&R. Also, I was planning on doing some research there for my latest book." At that point Chuza's face formed a small frown. It was slightly embarrassing after all in Chuza's mind that a man like Lord Jiraiya would waste his time writing such trashy books. Just as Chuza's face went back to its previous neutral state, Jiraiya spoke up again. "Look Chuza, can I borrow Naruto for a minute? It shouldn't take more than a few minutes, and then you and your team can go about your business." Figuring that Jiraiya must have a good reason for requesting Naruto's time, Chuza agreed to let Jiraiya and Naruto go talk. Jiraiya then led Naruto a little ways away from Chuza and Rei before Jiraiya started to talk. "Naruto, you most likely don't know it, but the Yondaime was a very good friend of your mother. When the Yondaime heard that your mother was expecting you, he wrote to me and requested that I allow your mother to sign the Toad contract as a gift to celebrate your birth." Jiraiya then pulled a large scroll from behind his back before he continued on. "Due to Kyuubi attacking, your mother died before she could sign the contract. Now normally I wouldn't offer this Naruto, but I'm going to offer you the chance to sign the Toad contract in your mother's place. Knowing the Yondaime like I did, I figure that he would most likely have requested that you sign the contract as well once you became a ninja." Naruto stood where he was at that moment and thought about what Jiraiya had told him. The Yondaime being friends with his mother would at least partially explain why the Yondaime had chosen him to contain the Kyuubi. Recalling one of his and Irika's private conversations, Naruto pulled up all that he knew about summoning contracts. According to Irika, a summoning contract was a binding agreement where a ninja agreed to pay with his blood and chakra for the help of one particular group of summoned creatures. Once a person signed a contract, that person was forever bound to a particular group of summoned creatures and would never be able to sign another contract. His enemies would become his summon's enemies and their enemies would become his enemies. The same thing went for friends, at least according to what Irika knew. Personally, Naruto was willing to believe Irika because Irika never taught something unless Irika was sure that it was correct. Out of the various summoning contracts that Naruto knew of, he figured that the only contract besides the toads that Jiraiya was offering that he had a shot at getting to sign was the monkey contract. However, there were two important facts in Naruto's mind that had an impact on his decision. First of all, his family apparently had at least a passing association with the toads. Second, and most important in Naruto's mind, was the issue of future summoners. Both Jiraiya and Sarutobi were quite old as far as active ninja went, but there were differences between the two that were relevant for Naruto's decision. Sarutobi had his children, Konohamaru, and a few younger grandchildren to pass the monkey contract on to when Sarutobi died. While Jiraiya, on the other hand, was the last living member of his family, and all of Jiraiya's students had died. If there were no living summoners for a contract, then the contract would be taken away by the summons to their home. That fact made up Naruto's mind, and he decided to accept Jiraiya's offer. There was no way that Naruto would allow the Toad contract to vanish if he had a chance. Although all summon home locations were tightly guarded secrets, only Jiraiya knew where Mayuboka Mountain was, so if the contract vanished it would most likely stay gone until someone managed to stumble upon Mayuboka Mountain again. Besides, Naruto had always admired the toads when he heard about how the Yondaime was known to use them in battle. With a serious but still cheerful face, Naruto said, "All right, Jiraiya, I'll sign the Toad contract." Placing the large scroll on the ground, Jiraiya opened the scroll so that his name, Minato Namikaze's name, and a few blank columns were visible. Looking up from his squatting position, Jiraiya said, "All right, Naruto, sign the contract. Remember that you need to write your name in your blood and then place the fingerprints, also in your blood, of your dominant hand at the bottom of the column that you sign your name in." Nodding his head, Naruto bit his right thumb and proceeded to do as Jiraiya had directed. After Naruto was finished, Jiraiya rolled the scroll back up and said in a business-like way, "Congratulations, kid. You are now the latest summoner of the Toads. Since it looks like your teammates are waiting on you, I think you should go back now. Don't worry about not knowing the hand signs needed to summon, as all summoning contracts use the same exact sign sequence. Besides, you would likely forget them if I showed them to you right now anyway." Naruto ignored Jiraiya's last comment and headed over to rejoin his team. On the morning after Team Chuza got back to Konoha, Iori woke up and headed downstairs after he had changed into his regular clothes. His mother was currently cooking at the small family kitchen, and his father was currently sitting at the table nearby reading the newspaper. After greeting his parents, Iori went over to the fridge and poured himself a glass of milk. Closing the refrigerator, Iori walked over and sat across the table from his father. Iori took a gulp of his milk and then said, "So, Dad, anything in the paper today that isn't a load of rubbish?" A small smile appeared on Mrs. Kusunagi's face, as this was something of a morning ritual in the Kusunagi household. Putting down his newspaper, Iori's dad looked straight at Iori, and then he said, "Yes, Iori, there is a lot more than just rubbish in the newspaper. Perhaps if you bothered to actually read the news once in a while, you'd see that for yourself." Mrs. Kusunagi noticed that her husband seemed a bit more tense than usual and inquired as to what he had read. Pinching the bridge of his nose, Mr. Kusunagi said, "Sorry, dear, and sorry, Iori, for sounding a little sharp today. I just read about how the Wind Daimyo died last night due to falling down a flight of stairs because he slipped on some tea." Blinking his eyes, Iori took a second to process what his father had just told him. After his mind processed the information, Iori shrugged his shoulders and said, "A suitable ending for a stupid buffoon." All Mr. Kusunagi did about Iori's comment was to ask for some more coffee. It was an open secret that most of Konoha's higher-level ninjas had no real respect for the Wind Daimyo and would be glad to see him go. In fact, the only people who would mourn the Wind Daimyo's passing would be a few civilian councilmen and some paper-pushing ninjas who would miss the decline of missions from Wind Country. That those missions would decline was a given, as heir to Wind Country was known to have opposed his father on many domestic and fiscal issues. Going on to more pleasant topics, Iori was asked how his mission went, as he had only given vague details about it when he came home yesterday. Figuring that there was no harm in telling his parents about the mission, Iori gave them a detailed report on the mission. Iori then went on to talk about the journey back to Konoha and in particular his teammates' run-in with Jiraiya. On hearing that one of Iori's teammates had signed a summoning contract, Iori's parents gave each other a quick glance. After looking at each other for a moment, they nodded their heads and Mr. Kusunagi spoke. "Well, Iori, that sounds like an interesting mission you just went on. Before you go met with your teammates today, why don't you sign the family summoning contract? You were going to get it later, but your mother and I think that you've shown enough maturity to be allowed to sign now. Besides, this way you and your teammate can learn to summon at the same time." Iori was surprised when he first heard his father mention the summoning contract, but then a smile appeared on his face. The mongoose contract had been in the Kusunagi family for generations, and it was one of the few items that Iori's parents had been able to take with them when they fled from Grass Country. Although not as famous as the toad, slug, or snake contract, the mongoose contract was respected due to the mongoose's noted abilities for being agile and for their knack in fighting other summons. Usually the mongooses would dismiss a summoned animal after they attacked. However, the mongooses were known to occasionally kill another summon, like Haji, the mongoose boss, killed Manda's father before Manda took over the snakes. Mrs. Kusunagi then went upstairs and came back down a few minutes later carrying the contract in her arms. With a smile on her face, she set the contract down on the table in front of Iori and said, "Here you go, son. Please put this back upstairs in the master bedroom once you're finished signing. After that, wake up the twins and tell them that breakfast will be ready in 15 minutes. Naruto, Rei, and Iori were all sitting around at Team Chuza's usual training ground talking about what had happened since they had come back from their last mission. Naruto talked about how he and Irika had gone to Naruto's favorite ramen stand to celebrate a successful C-rank mission. Iori explained that he mostly just lazed about at home for that afternoon and that he played with the twerps as well. Rei wasn't able to relax as much because her grandfather had her and her brother cleaning up the house because her cousin was coming over in a few weeks to stay in Konoha for the next month or so. Both boys offered to help Ray clean up her house, but Ray turned them down, saying that it was all taken care of already. After that conversation quieted down a bit, Naruto said, "You know, we must be the oddest genin team in Konoha. I mean, seriously, besides the things that already set us apart from our classmates, we are probably the only genin team that all the genin have summoning contracts. Even the Sannin didn't get their contracts until they were all Chunin after all. And here we are, 3 rookie genin with contracts. Me with the Toads, Iori with the Mongooses, and Ray here is going to get to sign the Raven contract next week for her birthday. Which reminds me, I still need to go out and get you a birthday gift, Ray." At that point, Ray blushed slightly, as she wasn't used to the idea of people outside of her family going out and getting her a birthday present. Iori, who was lying on a tree branch above where Naruto and Ray were sitting, then chimed in and said, "You're right about needing to go get a birthday present for Ray, Naruto. How about we double-check with her folks to make sure that we don't accidentally buy the same gift twice?" Ray's face by that point was doing an impression of a tomato from embarrassment. Although Ray was quite embarrassed by Naruto and Iori's comments, she was very grateful that she had friends like the boys. After being isolated in her academy class like she had been, Ray treasured Naruto and Iori's friendship for the simple friendship that it was. Being able to have people that she could relate to like Team Chuza was a dream come true for the Ice Priestess, as she had heard some girls call her behind her back. Figuring Ray didn't want to listen to them talk about her birthday anymore, Naruto decided to change the topic slightly. While it might be odd that we're all going to have summoning contracts, it works out very well. I mean, once we all get some practice with our contracts, we will be in great shape summoning-wise. It is known that the Toad, the Mongooses, and the Ravens are all friendly with each other, so we won't have to worry too much about summon conflicts like a few teams have to deal with. Also, the abilities of the Toads, Mongooses, and the Ravens complement each other, giving us a good balance. True, we won't really have to worry about that sort of thing for a while, and we first have to learn to summon correctly, but it is a good thing, I think, to think about. After listening to Naruto talk, both Ray and Iori nodded their heads to show that they agreed with what Naruto said. Iori at this point hopped down out of the tree, saying that he saw Chuza coming over, and the other 2 team members quickly saw Chuza coming after they were told of his approach. Chuza stopped about 5 feet in front of the trio and then said, "Okay team, here's the deal. First we are going to do our normal team exercises, and then once that's done we're going to go and get a mission. Just so you know ahead of time, our mission will be a D-rank mission. Konoha's regulations state that all rookie genin teams must take at least 2 D-rank missions in between C-rank missions. This is designed to give you guys the chance to better cool off and not get too psychologically worked up due to mission stress. They might be annoying, but no one can really claim that D-rank missions are stressful, unless it involves chasing after that cat." Team Chuza all had a good laugh at Chuza's joke before they all set about with their planned activities for the day.